My wife's body wasn't even cold when my daughter demanded I sell our home. Forget her and move on, she kept saying. But while trying to save my wife's belongings from the trash, I found a note hidden inside her favorite hat. Honey, if you are reading this, check the suitcase under the stairs. The truth is inside. I opened it and everything flipped. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated you. The black limousine smelled of stale air conditioning and dying lilies. I sat in the back, my hands resting on my knees, clutching a single white rose. It was the last one from the arrangement that had draped over Esther's casket. 40 years. That is how long we had been a team. Now the seat beside me was empty and the silence was loud enough to break my eardrums. The driver turned the corner onto Elm Street, and I prepared myself for the comfort of our home. I needed to sit in her favorite armchair. I needed to smell the lavender she dried in the kitchen. I needed to mourn in the house we had bought with sweat and grease from my years as a mechanic. But comfort was not what was waiting for me. As the car pulled into the driveway, I blinked, thinking my grief was causing hallucinations. A massive, rusted industrial dumpster sat squarely in the middle of the driveway. It was an ugly orange metal beast, and its heavy steel wheels were crushing the bed of prize-winning white roses Esther had tended to for 2 decades. The petals were mashed into the mud. I did not wait for the driver to open the door. I shoved it open and stumbled out, my legs stiff from the cemetery service. The humid Georgia air hit me, but it was the sight in front of me that knocked the wind out of my lungs. Hunter, my son-in-law, was standing by the garage door. He was not wearing a suit. He was not wearing black. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt and khaki shorts, dressed as if he were heading to the country club for a round of golf, not welcoming a widower home from a funeral. He was pointing a finger, directing 2 burly men in coveralls who were hauling boxes out of my front door. "Hey, watch the paint!" Hunter shouted at them, taking a sip from a bottle of expensive sparkling water. I walked faster, my grip tightening on the white rose until the thorns dug into my palm. The pain grounded me. "Hunter," I called out. My voice was raspy from crying, but it was loud enough to make him turn. "What is this? What is that dumpster doing on my wife's garden?" Hunter looked at me over the rim of his sunglasses. He didn't offer a condolence. He didn't offer a hand. He checked his watch, a heavy gold thing that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. "Langston, you are back early," he said, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. "We are just getting a head start. Zoe wants this place listed by Monday, and frankly, there is a lot of junk to clear out." Junk. He called it junk. I looked at the box the first worker was carrying toward the metal lip of the dumpster. I recognized the faded floral pattern on the side. It was Esther's collection of cookbooks. Handwritten recipes from her mother, her grandmother notes she had scribbled in the margins about how much salt to add to the collard greens or how to perfect the peach cobbler. That box contained the history of our family dinners. "Put that down," I ordered the worker. The man hesitated, looking from me to Hunter. "Ignore him," Hunter said, stepping between me and the worker. "Keep moving. We are paying you by the hour." I tried to step around Hunter, but he blocked my path. He was 35 a foot taller than me, and broad in the way men are who spend hours at the gym but never do a day of hard labor. I was 68, my back was bent from years of leaning over engines, and my hands were permanently stained with oil, but I was not weak. "That is not trash, Hunter," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had not felt since the 70s. "Those are her recipes. Those are her memories. It is clutter." Langston Hunter sighed, rolling his eyes. "Look, I know you are emotional right now. That is natural. But we have to be practical. The market is hot right now. This neighborhood is gentrifying. We need to stage the house, and we cannot do that with all this old, dusty clutter everywhere." He reached out and plucked the white rose from my hand. He tossed it casually into the dumpster as if it were a candy wrapper. It lands on a black trash bag, a speck of purity amidst the filth. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct. I lunged for the box in the worker's hands. "Give it to me," I shouted. I grabbed the cardboard edge. The worker pulled back, surprised. The box tipped. Decades of recipes spilled out onto the asphalt driveway. Old yellowed papers fluttered in the wind. A heavy binder hit the ground with a thud, its spine cracking. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to gather them. My knees hit the concrete hard, tearing my suit pants, but I didn't care. I grabbed a recipe card for sweet potato pie, watching the ink blur under a drop of oil from the driveway. Hunter laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Pathetic, he muttered. Langston, leave it. It is garbage. You are embarrassing yourself. I looked up at him from the ground. You have no right, I hissed. This is my house. Not for long, Hunter said. He stepped closer, towering over me. His shadow fell across my face. Listen to me, old man. You cannot maintain this place. Zoe knows it. I know it. You are forgetting things. You leave the lights on. You forget where you put your keys. You are slipping, Langston. We are doing you a favor. I stood up, clutching the binder to my chest. I am not slipping. I am grieving. There is a difference. Hunter shook his head. He signaled the second worker who was carrying a crate of vinyl records. My heart stopped. Those were Esther's jazz records. Original pressings of Miles Davis, Coltrane, Ella Fitzgerald. She played them every Sunday morning while she braided Zoe's hair. Music was the soul of this house. Toss it, Hunter commanded. No, I screamed. I threw myself at the second worker. I wasn't thinking about my age or my dignity. I just needed to save the music. I grabbed the crate, wrestling it from the man's grip. Hunter moved fast. He grabbed my shoulder and shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a forceful, dismissive shove, the kind you give to a drunk bothering you at a bar. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the driveway where the roots of the oak tree had lifted the concrete. I flailed, trying to find my balance, but I went down hard. I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. My glasses flew off my face and skittered across the pavement. The crate of records fell from my hands. I heard the sickening crack of vinyl snapping against cement. Pain shot up my hip and elbow. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the blue sky, gasping for air. The world was blurry without my glasses. Hunter stood over me, dusting off his hands as if he had just taken out the trash. Look at you, he sneered. You can barely stand up, and you think you can live here alone. You are a liability, Langston. I reached out my hand, trembling, searching for my glasses. I found them near the tire of the dumpster. The left lens was cracked. A spider web of fractured glass distorted my vision as I put them back on. Hunter turned his back on me. Get those records in the dumpster, he barked at the workers, and be quick about it. I watched helplessly as they scooped up the broken shards of Esther's music and threw them into the metal bin. The sound of the records hitting the bottom hollow and final echoed in my chest. Dad, stop it. The voice came from the front porch. It wasn't soft. It wasn't comforting. It was sharp and cold. I pushed myself up to a sitting position and looked toward the house. Zoe was standing there. My daughter, my only child. She was wearing a black dress, but it was too tight, too short for a funeral. She held a glass of wine in one hand and her mother's jewelry box in the other. She didn't rush down the stairs to help me. She didn't scream at her husband for pushing her father. She just stood there leaning against the doorframe, looking bored. Zoe, I croaked, finally managing to get to my feet. Hunter is throwing away your mother's things. He pushed me. Zoe took a sip of wine. She walked slowly down the steps, her heels clicking on the pavement. She stopped a few feet away from me. She looked at my torn pants, my bloody palm, the cracked glasses. She didn't see a father in pain. She saw a mess she had to clean up. You are being dramatic, Dad, she said. Her voice was flat. Hunter is just trying to help. We have a schedule to keep. She walked past me and handed the jewelry box to Hunter. Put this in the car, she told him. I need to get it appraised tomorrow. Appraised. She wasn't keeping her mother's necklace. She was selling it. Zoe, I said, my voice gaining strength. This is my home. I am not selling it. And you are not selling your mother's jewelry. Zoe turned to me. Her eyes, which used to be so full of light when she was a little girl, were now hard and dark. It is not your choice, Dad, she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a glossy brochure. She slapped it against my chest. Sunny Meadows, she said. I already paid the deposit. It is a nice facility. They have a bus that takes you to the mall on Tuesdays. You will like it there. I looked at the brochure. It showed happy old people playing bingo. It looked like a waiting room for death. I am not going to a home, I said, dropping the brochure. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Zoe stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. Stop being selfish, she hissed. Mom is gone. You are alone. You cannot afford the property taxes on this place with your little mechanic's pension. Do you want to lose the house to the state? Do you want to end up on the street? We are trying to save you from yourself. We need the equity, Langston Hunter chimed in, walking back from his car. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing it just hard enough to hurt. The market is peaking. We can get $600,000 for this place if we list it by Monday. We can invest that money. Secure everyone's future. Your future, I said, looking from Hunter to Zoe. You mean your future? Zoe rolled her eyes. We are family, Dad. What is ours is yours. But you have to be realistic. You are an old man. You are confused. You just fell down in the driveway for no reason. I didn't fall, I said, staring at Hunter. He pushed me. Hunter laughed, shaking his head at the workers who were watching the scene with wide eyes. See what I mean? He is imagining things. Paranoia. It is a classic symptom. Zoe sighed, a sound of supreme annoyance. Look, Dad, the realtor is coming in 20 minutes to take photos of the exterior. I need you to go inside, take a shower, and put on clean clothes. You look like a beggar. And stay in your room. I do not want you scaring off the professionals. She turned to Hunter. Get the rest of these boxes out of the living room. I want the floor clear. They walked past me as if I were a statue, a piece of lawn furniture that had seen better days. I stood there alone in the driveway, surrounded by the scattered recipes of the woman I loved. I bent down and picked up a piece of paper. It was the recipe for the birthday cake Esther made for Zoe every year until she moved out. Chocolate with peanut butter frosting. Zoe had forgotten. Or maybe she just didn't care. I realized then that my grief was a luxury I could not afford. I looked at the house. My house. The house I had paid for with double shifts and blistered hands. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a senile old mechanic who would just fade away into a bingo hall. I wiped the blood from my hand onto my trousers. I adjusted my cracked glasses. They were wrong. I wasn't going to the shower. And I certainly wasn't going to Sunny Meadows. I walked toward the front door, not with the heavy step of a mourner, but with the quiet tread of a man entering enemy territory. I walked past Hunter, who was laughing on the phone, probably boasting to his friends about the listing price. I walked past Zoe, who was pouring herself another glass of wine in the kitchen. I went straight to the hallway closet. I needed a box, not to pack for the nursing home, but to save what I could before the vultures picked the carcass clean. That is when I saw it. Esther's favorite purple church hat sitting on the top shelf, dusty and forgotten by everyone but me. I reached for it, needing to feel the velvet one last time. But when I pulled it down, I felt something crinkle inside the lining. It wasn't just fabric. There was paper inside. Thick, folded paper. I glanced over my shoulder. Zoe was in the living room shouting at the TV remote. Hunter was outside. I slipped my hand inside the hat band. My fingers brushed against an envelope. I pulled it out. It was sealed with wax the way Esther used to seal her letters when we were courting. On the front, in her shaky, beautiful handwriting, were 2 words. For Langston. My hands trembled. I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery and a small brass key. The note was short. Langston, my love. If you are reading this, I am gone and Zoe is already trying to sell the house. I know our daughter, I know her husband. They think we are simple. They think we have nothing but this house and your pension. Let them think that. Do not trust them, Langston. Do not sign anything. Take this key. Go to the basement to the loose panel behind the water heater. You know the one. The code for the suitcase is the date we opened the shop. The truth is inside, and it is time they learned exactly who we are. I stared at the note, the basement, the water heater. I had thought that panel was just bad carpentry I never got around to fixing. Esther had hidden something there. Outside, a car pulled up. The realtor. Dad, Zoe shouted from the living room. Get upstairs. Now I shoved the note and the key into my pocket. I looked at the hallway mirror. My eyes were red, my face was streaked with dirt, and my glasses were broken. I looked like a victim. Good, I thought. Let them see a victim. I turned and shuffled toward the stairs, feigning a limp I didn't have. Yes, Zoe, I called out, making my voice sound weak and trembling. I am going. I am just a tired old man. I climbed the stairs, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I waited until I heard the front door open and Zoe's fake high-pitched voice greeting the realtor. Then I took off my shoes. I moved silently down the back hallway toward the basement door. The hunt was on, and the old mechanic was about to fix something much bigger than a car engine. I washed the blood off my hands in the basement utility sink and hid the brass key inside the hollow leg of my old workbench. I did not have time to find the suitcase yet. Zoe was screaming my name from the top of the stairs, her voice shrill and demanding. I needed to play my part. I needed them to believe I was the confused, broken old man they wanted me to be. I shuffled up the stairs, letting my shoulders slump, and walked into the living room. The room, which had been a warm sanctuary of laughter and music just days ago, now felt like an interrogation cell. Zoe had cleared the coffee table. The only thing sitting on the polished wood was a glossy brochure and a thick legal document. "Sit down, Dad," Zoe said. It was not a request. She pointed to the armchair, the one opposite the sofa where she and Hunter sat side by side like a tribunal judge panel. I sat down slowly, letting out a groan of pain that wasn't entirely faked. My hip throbbed from the fall Hunter had caused. Zoe leaned forward, clasping her hands together. Her nails were painted a stark, aggressive red. "We need to talk about your future," she began. Her tone was patronizing, the kind of voice one uses for a toddler who refuses to eat their vegetables. "We cannot have a repeat of what happened in the driveway. You were out of control, Dad. You were violent." I looked at her. "I wasn't violent, Zoe. I was protecting your mother's property." "You were confused," Hunter cut in. He was tapping his foot on the floor in nervous, rapid rhythm. "You attacked a worker. You fell down because you lost your balance. It is a clear sign of cognitive decline." I said nothing. I just looked at the brochure on the table. Sunny Meadows Senior Living Community. The cover featured a silver-haired couple clinking champagne glasses on a balcony. It looked like a vacation resort. I knew better. I had visited my friend Otis there 2 years ago before he passed. The place smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. The residents sat in wheelchairs in the hallway, staring at blank walls, waiting for visitors who never came. It wasn't a community. It was a warehouse for the inconvenient elderly. "Look at this place, Dad," Zoe said, tapping the brochure. "It is 5 stars. They have a heated pool. They have movie nights. They have a gourmet dining hall. You will not have to lift a finger. No more cooking, no more cleaning, no more worrying about the roof leaking. It is paradise." "It costs $5,000 a month," I said quietly. "My pension is $2,000. "That is why we need to sell the house," Hunter said quickly. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the value of everything he saw. "We sell the house, we invest the capital, and the dividends pay for your care. It is simple math, Langston." I looked at Hunter. He was sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his upper lip, even though the air conditioning was blasting. He kept checking his phone, sliding it out of his pocket, glancing at the screen and sliding it back. "Why the rush, Hunter?" I asked. "Esther has been dead for 3 days. The house isn't going anywhere. The market is volatile," Hunter snapped. He ran a hand through his gelled hair. "We have a window of opportunity. If we wait, interest rates could hike and the property value could tank. We are trying to maximize your assets, Langston." "We are trying to help you." He pulled his phone out again. This time, he didn't slide it back immediately. He placed it face up on the coffee table right next to the legal document. A notification popped up. The screen lit up, and because I had spent 40 years inspecting hairline cracks and engine blocks, my eyes were sharper than they gave me credit for. The text was bold and short. "Final notice, 48 hours or we break legs." It wasn't a bank alert, it wasn't a realtor, it was a threat. I looked at Hunter's face. He was staring at me, trying to look dominant, but I saw the terror behind his eyes. He wasn't worried about the housing market, he wasn't worried about my cognitive health, he was terrified. They were broke. My daughter and her husband, who drove leased luxury cars and wore designer clothes, were drowning, and my house was their life raft. I leaned back in the chair, letting this realization settle in my gut. They didn't want to put me in a home because they cared. They wanted to liquidate my life to pay their debts. "I am not selling," I said. My voice was calm. "I am staying here." Zoe let out a frustrated huff. "Dad, be reasonable. You cannot live here alone. You are clearly unable to manage." "I managed just fine until you two showed up with a dumpster," I replied. Hunter stood up abruptly. He grabbed the legal document from the table and thrust it toward me. It was a power of attorney form. "This isn't a negotiation," Langston Hunter said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "We are not asking you. We are telling you." I looked at the paper. It gave Hunter full control over my assets, my medical decisions, and my property. If I signed that, I would be a ghost in my own life. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, looking up at him. Hunter smiled, but it was an ugly thing. Then we do this the hard way. He pulled out his phone again and scrolled through something. He turned the screen toward me. It was a video. It was a recording of me in the driveway taken from the angle of the porch. It showed me lunging at the worker. It showed me wrestling for the crate. It showed me falling. But the angle was deceptive. From the video, it looked like I had attacked the man unprovoked and then collapsed from frailty. It didn't show Hunter's shove. "We have this video," Hunter said. "And we have the testimony of 2 workers who will swear on a stack of Bibles that you attacked them in a fit of dementia-induced rage. They will testify that you were incoherent, violent, and a danger to yourself and others." Zoe chimed in, her voice soft and poisonous. "We have already spoken to a lawyer, Dad. If you don't sign this voluntary transfer of authority, we will file for emergency guardianship. We will show this video to a judge. We will tell them how you have been forgetting things, how you have been talking to yourself." She leaned forward, placing a hand on my knee. "They will declare you incompetent, Dad. And then the state will put you in a facility. And it won't be Sunny Meadows, it will be a state-run ward. You will lose everything and you will have no say in it." I looked at my daughter. She was threatening to lock her own father away in a mental ward just to get her hands on my money. The betrayal didn't hurt anymore. It just burned hot and clean, fueling the fire in my belly. "You would do that?" I asked. "You would stand in court and lie about your father. I am doing what is best for the family." Zoe said, her eyes cold. "Mom would have wanted us to take care of you." "Do not speak her name," I said sharply. Hunter slammed his hand on the table, making the brochure jump. "Sign the damn paper, Langston. We are done playing games. You sign this and we put you in Sunny Meadows. You get your meals, your bingo, your little bus rides. You get to live out your days in comfort. You refuse and we destroy you in court. You have until tomorrow morning to decide." He tossed a black pen onto the document. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was a helpless old man with no resources and no fight left. They had the video. They had the narrative. They had the strength of youth and the cruelty of desperation. But they didn't have the brass key in the basement. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Hunter. "I need to think," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. "I need to sleep on it." Hunter snatched the pen back. "Fine. Tomorrow morning at 8. If this paper isn't signed, I am calling my lawyer and filing the petition." He grabbed Zoe's hand. "Come on, let's go get dinner. I can't stand the smell of this place." They walked out, leaving me alone in the living room with the brochure of the fake paradise and the legal document that was essentially my death warrant. I waited until I heard their car pull out of the driveway. I waited until the silence of the house returned. Then I stood up. I didn't limp. I didn't groan. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a flashlight, and headed for the basement door. Hunter thought he had given me a deadline. He thought he had 24 hours to break me. He was wrong. I had 12 hours to find out what Esther had left me. 12 hours to arm myself. I went down the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The air in the basement was cool and smelled of oil and sawdust. It was my domain. I went to the water heater in the corner. I found the loose panel Esther had mentioned in her note. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Behind the drywall, hidden in the dark crawl space, sat a vintage leather suitcase. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. It was heavy. I pulled it out, dragging it onto the concrete floor. I shone the flashlight on the lock. It was a combination dial, the date we opened the shop. I remembered it like it was yesterday. June 12th, 1982. The day we put the sign up. The day we bet on ourselves. I turned the dials. 0, 6, 1, 2, 8, 2. The locks clicked with a satisfying snap. I took a deep breath. Upstairs, my daughter was planning my demise. Down here, my wife had left me a lifeline. I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made me gasp. It wasn't just papers. It was a war chest, and the first thing lying on top was a stack of photos. Photos of Hunter. But he wasn't at work. He wasn't at home. He was handing an envelope of cash to a man I recognized from the news, a man who was currently under indictment for corporate fraud. I picked up the photo. My hands were steady now. "You want to play dirty, Hunter?" I whispered to the empty basement. I turned the page of the ledger lying beneath the photos. "Let's play." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan that wasn't spinning. The air was thick and hot. I had hidden the ledger and the photos from the suitcase inside the ventilation duct behind my dresser. I knew they would search the room eventually. I needed to be ready, but my body was exhausted. The physical toll of the funeral, the fight in the driveway, and the discovery in the basement had drained me. I drifted into a light, uneasy doze, my hand resting near the nightstand. A sound woke me. It wasn't the settling of the house beams. It was a sharp metallic screech, like iron scraping against iron. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was coming from down the hall, from the spare bedroom we had converted into Esther's office. It was where she paid the bills, organized her church bulletins, and kept our important papers. I threw off the covers. I didn't reach for my glasses. I didn't need to see clearly to know what was happening. I reached under the bed and my fingers closed around the taped handle of my old Louisville Slugger. I hadn't swung a bat in 20 years, not since I coached Zoe's Little League team, but the weight of it felt familiar and reassuring. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The hallway was dark, but a sliver of yellow light spilled from under the office door. Shadows moved across the floorboards, frantic and jerky. I heard a voice. It was Zoe. "It has to be here," she hissed. Her voice was tight with panic. Mom never trusted banks with everything. She always kept a stash. "Just open the damn thing." Hunter grunted. I gripped the bat tighter. They weren't mourning. They were looting. I walked down the hall, stepping over the creaky board I had meant to fix for years. I didn't want to give them a warning. I wanted to catch them red-handed. I wanted to see the shame on their faces. I reached the door and kicked it open. It slammed against the wall with a thunderous crash. "Get away from there," I roared. The scene inside froze. It was a tableau of greed. The room was tossed. Drawers were pulled out and dumped on the floor. Books were swept off the shelves. And there, in the corner, kneeling in front of the small fireproof safe we kept for deeds and birth certificates, were my daughter and her husband. Hunter was holding a crowbar jammed into the seam of the safe door. Zoe was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, her hands frantic as she sifted through them. They didn't jump. They didn't look guilty. They just looked annoyed. Hunter slowly stood up, hefting the crowbar in his hand. He looked at my baseball bat and smirked. "Go back to bed, Langston," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This doesn't concern you." "It doesn't concern me," I yelled, stepping into the room. "This is my house. That is my wife's safe. Get out!" Zoe scrambled to her feet. She wasn't wearing the black dress anymore. She was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair a mess. She looked wild. "Where is it, Dad?" she screamed. She didn't look at me like a father. She looked at me like an obstacle. Where did she hide the cash? I know she had a life insurance payout coming. I know she stashed money from her side jobs. Where is it? "There is no money, Zoe," I said, keeping the bat raised. "Your mother was a nurse. We lived on a budget. You know that." "Liar!" she shrieked. She grabbed a handful of papers from the desk. My stomach dropped. I recognized the blue ribbon tied around them. They weren't financial documents. They were my letters. The letters I wrote to Esther when I was drafted before we were married. The letters I wrote her on our anniversaries. Zoe put those down, I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Money," she chanted, her eyes scanning the pages. She ripped the ribbon off. She shook the envelopes, hoping cash would fall out. When nothing did, she growled in frustration. She took the first letter, the one I wrote from boot camp in 1971, and ripped it in half. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than a gunshot in that small room. "It is just trash," she spat, throwing the pieces on the floor. "Just sentimental garbage. Tell us the combination to the safe, Dad, or I rip them all up." She grabbed another one. That was enough. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I swung the bat, aiming for the desk to scare her, to make her stop destroying the only pieces of my heart I had left. But I was 68 years old, and Hunter was 35. Before I could complete the swing, Hunter lunged. He didn't use the crowbar. He didn't need to. He caught the barrel of the bat with his left hand, stopping it dead in midair. The shock of the impact vibrated up my arms. He wrenched the bat from my grip with a violent twist that nearly dislocated my thumb. It clattered to the floor, useless. Hunter shoved me backward. I stumbled, tripping over a pile of overturned books, and fell hard against the bookshelf. The wind left me in a wheeze. Hunter stood over me, the crowbar in one hand, my bat in the other. He looked like a giant. "You are pathetic," he said. He wasn't even out of breath. "Look at you, trying to play the tough guy. You are a fragile old man, Langston. You are lucky I don't break your jaw right now." Zoe didn't even look up. She kept tearing the letters one by one. Rip, rip, rip. The sound was torture. "Please," I whispered, my pride broken on the floor. "Please stop. Those are private. Those are all I have of her." Zoe looked at me then. Her eyes were empty. "You have nothing," she said coldly. "You have absolutely nothing unless you give us that combination. I don't have it." I lied. "Esther changed it last year." Hunter laughed. He tossed the bat into the corner. He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine. I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "You are lying," he said, "but it doesn't matter. Tomorrow the lawyer brings the locksmith. We will crack this tin can open whether you like it or not. And as for you..." He grabbed the front of my pajama shirt and hauled me up. He dragged me out of the office, his grip iron tight. I tried to dig my heels in, but he was too strong. He dragged me down the hall, past the pictures of Zoe's graduation, past the cross-stitch Esther had made that said, "Bless this home." He threw me into my bedroom. I stumbled and fell onto the mattress. "Stay there," Hunter barked. He reached for the door handle. I realized what he was doing. The lock on the master bedroom was an old heavy-duty deadbolt we had installed years ago for security. It locked from both sides. "Hunter, don't you dare!" I shouted, scrambling toward the door. He slammed it shut in my face. I heard the key turn in the lock. The click was final. I pounded on the wood with my fists. "Open this door. This is my house. You cannot lock me in here. Save your energy," old man Hunter's voice came muffled through the door. "Get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. The appraiser is coming at 9, and the shuttle for Sunny Meadows will be here at noon. Pack your bags." I heard his footsteps walk away. I heard him go back into the office. I heard Zoe's voice high and frantic, and the sound of more paper tearing. I sank down onto the floor, leaning my back against the door. I was a prisoner in the home I had built. My wife's memories were being desecrated in the next room. My daughter was a stranger driven mad by greed, and my son-in-law was a brute who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I felt weak. I felt defeated. But then I looked at the vent cover near the dresser. I crawled over to it. I pried the cover off with my fingernails until they bled. I reached inside and pulled out the stack of photos and the ledger I had taken from the suitcase. I looked at the photo of Hunter handing over the bribe. I looked at the ledger where Esther had recorded every cent she had spent cleaning up their messes. They had locked me in. They thought they had neutralized me. They thought I was helpless. I traced the face of my wife in the framed photo on the nightstand. She was smiling that secret, knowing smile she saved just for me. They tore up my letters. "Esther," I whispered to the empty room. I wiped a tear from my cheek. But they didn't tear up the evidence. I didn't need a baseball bat. I didn't need muscle. I had something better. I pulled my cell phone from under my pillow. It was old. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I dialed a number. Not the police. Not yet. I dialed the number Esther had written in the back of the ledger. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A woman's voice answered. Sharp, professional, awake at 3 in the morning as if she never slept. "This is Patel," she said, "Ms. Patel." I said, my voice steady and cold as the steel of the safe they were trying to break. "My name is Langston Carter. My wife Esther told me to call you if the vultures started circling." There was a pause on the other line, then the sound of a rustling page. "Mr. Carter," Ms. Patel said, her tone shifting to one of deadly precision. "I have been expecting your call. Are you ready to execute the protocol?" I looked at the locked door. I listened to the sounds of my daughter destroying my past. "Yes," I said, "I am ready. Burn them down." The sun came up, but it brought no warmth to the room where I had been a prisoner in my own home. My back was stiff from sleeping on the floor, and my mouth tasted like copper in old rage. At exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy deadbolt on my bedroom door clicked. It was the sound of a jailer beginning his shift. Hunter pushed the door open. He was wearing a fresh suit, blue and crisp, looking like he owned the world. He held a travel mug of coffee, the steam rising in the cool morning air. "Rise and shine, Langston," he said, not even looking at me. "The appraiser is here in an hour. I want this room cleared out. Pack what you can fit in 2 suitcases. The rest goes to the curb." He turned and walked away. his footsteps heavy and confident down the hall. He left the door open, a silent insult. He knew I wouldn't run. Where would a senile old man go without a car or money? I stood up, my knees popping. I didn't pack my things. I didn't care about my shirts or my old work boots. I walked straight to the walk-in closet that still held the scent of Esther. It smelled of rosewater and starch, a smell that used to mean safety. Now it smelled like a crime scene waiting to happen. Zoe had already been through here. I could see the gaps in the hangers where she had pulled out the expensive coats to sell, but she had left the things she deemed worthless, the Sunday dresses, the cardigans. And there on the top shelf, pushed back into the shadows, was the purple velvet hat. It was the hat Esther wore every Easter Sunday. It was wide-brimmed regale with a silk ribbon that had faded slightly over the years. I reached up and pulled it down. The velvet was soft under my rough, callous fingers. I held it to my chest, closing my eyes, trying to summon the feeling of her standing next to me in the pew, her hand in mine. But as I squeezed the hat, I felt something. It wasn't just the fabric. It was a stiff, crinkling resistance inside the lining of the crown. It felt too thick to be just interfacing. I opened my eyes. I turned the hat over. The lining was black silk, hand-stitched. Esther was a seamstress as well as a nurse. Her stitches were usually tiny and invisible. But here along the inner band, the thread was different. It was a slightly different shade of black, and the stitches were wider, hurried. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the sounds of Hunter shouting into his phone downstairs. I didn't have a knife. Hunter had taken everything sharp from the room. I used my teeth. I bit into the thread, tearing at the silk until it gave way. I ripped the lining open. A white envelope slid out. It wasn't a standard envelope. It was thick linen paper, the kind Esther saved for special occasions. On the front, in handwriting that was shaky, but unmistakably hers, was my name, Langston. I sat down heavily on the floor of the closet, surrounded by her shoes. My hands trembled so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside was a single page. The ink was smudged in places as if she had been crying or perhaps rushing while she wrote it. My dearest Langston, if you are holding this, it means my heart finally gave out and our daughter has shown her true colors. I prayed this day would never come, but I know Zoe. And I know the man she married. They see us as a bank account, not as parents. Do not trust them, Langston. Do not sign anything. They think we are simple. They think I was just a nurse and you were just a mechanic. Let them think that. You need to go to the basement, not the safe. They will break that eventually. You need to go to the space under the stairs. Remember the water damage we had in '98. Remember how we fixed the wall. I put it there, behind the false plaster. The code is the day we bought the first shop. Do not hesitate. Everything you need to survive them is inside. I love you. Fight for us. I stared at the letter, the date we bought the shop. August 15th, 1978, 8:1578. She knew. She had watched them just as I had, but she had been smarter. She had prepared. I folded the letter and shoved it into my sock. I put the hat back on the shelf, arranging it so it looked untouched. I needed to get to the basement. But Hunter and Zoe were downstairs. I could hear the murmur of their voices in the kitchen. They were drinking my coffee, planning my eviction. I walked out of the bedroom. I made my face a mask of defeat. I shuffled my feet. I am going to get some boxes from the basement. I called out, my voice cracking perfectly. For my clothes. Hunter appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at me with a sneer. Make it fast, old man. You have 40 minutes. And don't try anything stupid. The back door is locked. I nodded, keeping my head down. I trudged down the stairs, gripping the banister as if I needed the support. I walked past them. Zoe wouldn't even look at me. She was typing furiously on her laptop, probably liquidating assets she didn't even own yet. I opened the basement door and descended into the dark. The basement was my sanctuary. It was where I fixed toasters, built birdhouses, and escaped the noise of the world. But today, it was a vault. I walked to the area under the main staircase. It was a cramped, dusty corner filled with old paint cans and holiday decorations. I shoved the plastic Christmas tree box aside. There it was. The section of wall Esther had mentioned. It looked exactly like the rest of the basement drywall, painted a dull gray, slightly textured. But when I ran my hand over it, I felt the seam. It was subtle, hidden by a stack of old tires I had kept for a project that never happened. I pushed on it. It didn't budge. It wasn't a door. It was a false wall nailed shut. I needed to break it. I looked around my workbench. Hunter had taken my baseball bat, but he hadn't taken my tools. He didn't know what a sledgehammer was for. To him, it was just a dirty lump of iron. To me, it was a key. I grabbed the 4-pound sledgehammer from the rack. The handle was worn smooth by my grip over the years. It felt good. It felt like power. I looked up at the ceiling. I could hear Hunter's footsteps directly above me pacing in the hallway. If I started banging, he would hear it. He would come down. I had to be fast. I had to be violent. I took a breath. I swung. Crack! The sound of the hammer hitting the drywall was deafening in the small space. Dust exploded into the air. Upstairs, the footsteps stopped instantly. "What the hell are you doing down there?" Hunter shouted. His voice was muffled by the floorboards, but the anger was clear. I dropped a box. I yelled back, my voice straining to sound frail and clumsy. I tripped. "I am sorry. Just cleaning up." There was a pause. I held my breath, gripping the hammer so hard my knuckles turned white. "Hurry up," Hunter yelled. "Stop breaking the house before we sell it." The footsteps resumed. He wasn't coming down. He believed I was just a clumsy old fool. I exhaled. I didn't have much time. I swung again, this time aiming for the studs. The drywall crumbled. I swung again and again, putting 40 years of frustration into every blow. Chunks of plaster fell to the floor. The dust coated my face, my eyelashes, my throat. I cleared away the debris with my hands tearing at the jagged edges of the hole I had made. And there it was. Sitting in the dark recess between the studs, wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting to protect it from moisture, was a vintage leather suitcase. It was alligator skin, dark brown with brass corners that glinted in the beam of my flashlight. I reached in. It was heavy, much heavier than I expected. I dragged it out, the leather scraping against the concrete floor. I pulled off the plastic. The suitcase was old, but it was quality. It was the kind of luggage you buy when you plan to travel the world, not hide in a basement. I looked at the combination lock. The numbers were tarnished but legible. August 15th, 1978, 8, 1, 5, 7, 8. I turned the dials. The mechanism was stiff from disuse. Click, click, click. The latches popped open with a sound that felt like a gunshot. I lifted the heavy lid. A smell of old paper and lavender drifted up, mixing with the basement dust. My breath caught in my throat. The suitcase was packed tight. It wasn't just papers. On the left side, stacked in neat rubber-banded rows, were bundles of cash. Hundreds, thousands. More money than I had ever seen in one place in my life. But on the right side was the real treasure. 3 thick hardcover ledgers, a black USB drive taped to a manila folder, and a stack of legal documents with the seal of a major corporation stamped on the front. I picked up the first ledger. I opened it. Esther's handwriting filled the pages. Columns of numbers, dates, names. I saw Zoe's name. January 4th, 2014. Bail money for Zoe. DUI charge. $5,000. March 12th, 2015. Hunter's gambling debt. Bookie S. $12,000. August 20th, 2018. Abortion clinic fees. Zoe. Secret. $800. I flipped the pages, my hands shaking. It went on and on. 10 years of secrets. 10 years of bailouts. Esther hadn't just been a nurse. She had been the dam holding back the flood of our daughter's mistakes. I picked up the manila folder. The label read, Holding Corp. Equity Share. I opened it. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, my brain struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Esther didn't just own shares. She was the majority silent shareholder of the shell company that owned Hunter's employer. My wife, the woman who clipped coupons and darned my socks, owned the company that employed the man who was currently trying to evict me. I looked up at the ceiling. Hunter was walking around up there thinking he was the king of the castle, thinking he was smart, thinking he had won. He had no idea. He was standing on a landmine, and I had just found the detonator. I closed the suitcase. I locked it. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the executioner. I stood up, dusting the plaster from my knees. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase. "I am coming up, Hunter," I whispered, "and I am bringing the receipts." I sat on the cold concrete floor of the basement with the flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes, dancing in the stagnant air. My knees ached, and the dust from the drywall I had smashed coated my tongue, but I could not look away from the open suitcase. It was like looking into the soul of a woman I thought I knew perfectly, only to realize I had been living with a stranger, a brilliant, protective, and terrifying stranger. I picked up the first ledger again. It was a standard black composition notebook, the kind kids use in school, but inside it was a chronicle of our daughter's sins. I flipped past the first few pages I had seen earlier. The entries became more frequent and the amounts larger. November 14th, 2019. Hunter, gambling debt, Las Vegas, $50,000. Third time. I stared at the number. $50,000, that was more than I made in a year at the shop before I retired. Esther had paid it without a word. I remembered that November. Hunter had come back from a business trip looking haggard, claiming he had the flu. He had sat at our Thanksgiving table eating Esther's turkey and lied to my face about his success, while my wife quietly wrote a check to save his kneecaps from a bookie. I turned the page. February 2nd, 2020. Zoe. DUI charge, Atlanta. Bail and lawyer fees, $20,000. I remembered that night too. Zoe had called saying she was staying at a friend's house because of a storm. She hadn't been at a friend's house. She had been in a holding cell, and Esther had bailed her out. Esther had hired the lawyer to seal the record so Zoe's precious reputation at her marketing firm would not be tarnished. I felt a bile rise in my throat. My wife had spent the last decade of her life cleaning up the vomit and the mess of two adults who treated her like a servant. Zoe called her mother simple. She mocked Esther's coupon clipping and her second-hand clothes. Yet it was Esther's money that kept Zoe out of jail. It was Esther's money that kept Hunter from being buried in the desert. They didn't hate us because we were poor. They hated us because they were parasites who resented their host. They thought we were stupid, but Esther had been playing a game of chess they didn't even know existed. She had documented every penny, every lie, every bailout. "Why did you do it, Esther?" I whispered to the damp walls. "Why didn't you let them fall?" But I knew the answer. She was a mother who loved her child too much to let her fail, but who was smart enough to keep the receipts just in case of a day like today. I set the ledger aside, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and grief. I picked up the second item from the suitcase. It was a thick manila folder labeled Project Icarus. I opened it. Inside were copies of emails, bank transfer records, and internal memos from Hunter's investment firm, Sterling Capital. I started reading. The language was technical financial jargon about asset allocation and offshore routing, but Esther had highlighted the important parts in yellow marker. Hunter wasn't just a bad gambler. He was a thief. The documents showed a pattern of small siphonings from client accounts. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, just enough to go unnoticed in high-volume trading accounts, but enough to fund his leased BMW and his designer watches. But then I saw the date on the emails. These weren't just printed from a computer. They were forwarded. Hunter had been forwarding these emails to a private server, and someone had intercepted them. I turned to the back of the folder. There was a legal document on heavy bond paper. It was a deed of incorporation for a company called Blue Heron Holdings. I scanned the document. Blue Heron Holdings was a private equity firm registered in Delaware. It listed a single primary shareholder, the Esther May Carter Revocable Trust. My breath hitched. Blue Heron. That was the name of the street we grew up on. Esther owned a private equity firm. I flipped to the next page. It was a portfolio summary for Blue Heron Holdings. It listed assets, real estate, municipal bonds, and a 30% controlling stake in Sterling Capital. My vision blurred. I had to take off my broken glasses and wipe them on my shirt. I put them back on and looked again. It was there in black and white. Esther didn't just have money. Through a complex web of trusts and shell companies, my wife was the largest single shareholder of the company Hunter worked for. She was his boss. The man who was upstairs right now, stomping around my kitchen, calling me a senile old fool, worked for my wife. He had been stealing from her company. Every time he siphoned money from a client, he was stealing from Esther, and she knew. She had known the whole time. I looked at the notes in the margins of the investigation report, waiting for the right moment. She had written in red ink next to a particularly damning email where Hunter discussed hiding losses. He thinks he is a wolf, but he is just a dog stealing scraps. I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound that scraped my throat. Hunter walked around like he was a master of the universe. He treated me like dirt under his shoe because I had grease under my fingernails. But Esther owned the building he sat in. She owned the chair he sat on. She owned the very air he breathed in that office. She could have fired him at any moment. She could have sent him to prison years ago. But she waited. She watched. She let him dig his hole deeper and deeper until there was no way out. She was waiting for him to cross the line. And by trying to evict me, he had just sprinted across it. I put the folder down on top of the ledger. My head was spinning. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering, but there was still more in the suitcase. At the bottom beneath the files lay a stack of certificates and passbooks bound with a thick rubber band. I picked them up. The first was a savings account passbook from a bank I had never heard of in the Cayman Islands. I opened it. Balance as of last month, $2.2 million. I dropped the book. It hit the concrete with a slap. $2 million. I picked up the next item. Stock certificates. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, bought in the 80s and 90s. I did the math in my head roughly. We were talking about millions. Then there were the deeds, not just to our house, but to apartment complexes in neighborhoods that used to be ghettos 40 years ago but were now trendy districts where coffee cost $7. Esther had bought them for pennies when no one else wanted them. She had held on to them. She had let the city grow around them. My wife, the nurse who packed her lunch in a brown paper bag every day, was a real estate tycoon. She was a savant. I leaned back against the cold wall of the basement. I felt dizzy. All those years I worried about the electric bill. All those years I worked overtime to pay for Zoe's braces. Esther had millions sitting in a vault. Why didn't she tell me? I felt a flash of hurt, a sharp sting of exclusion. We were partners. We shared everything, or so I thought. Then I saw a small note paperclipped to the back of the Cayman passbook. Langston, my love, I know you are angry. You have a right to be. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I saw how money changed people. I saw what it did to my cousins. I wanted Zoe to grow up with values, not entitlements. I wanted her to know the value of work. I failed Langston. I gave her everything she needed, but she only wanted what she didn't earn. When I realized she was broken, it was too late to fix her with money. Money would only make her worse. So I hid it. I hid it to protect you from her greed. I hid it to protect us. But if you are reading this, I am gone. And the protection is over. Use it, Langston. Use it to finish what I couldn't. Teach them the lesson they refused to learn. I read the note 3 times. The hurt faded, replaced by a profound awe. She had carried this burden alone for decades. She had watched our daughter turn into a monster, and she had silently built a fortress to protect me from the inevitable fallout. She hadn't failed. She had prepared. I looked at the pile of wealth sitting in the dust of my basement. It was enough money to buy Sunny Meadows and burn it to the ground. It was enough money to crush Hunter and Zoe like insects. Upstairs, I heard a heavy thud, then the sound of shattering glass. Oops, I heard Hunter laugh, muffled by the floorboards. Looks like another antique bites the dust. My blood ran cold. They were breaking things now, just for fun, just to hurt me. I carefully packed the ledgers, the files, and the passbooks back into the suitcase. I latched it shut. I spun the combination lock. I wasn't just an old mechanic anymore. I wasn't just a grieving widower. I was the CEO of their destruction. I stood up. My legs felt strong. The pain in my hip was gone, replaced by the adrenaline of the hunt. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase. It was heavy, but it felt good. It felt like a weapon. I walked to the stairs. I climbed them slowly, deliberately. Esther had given me the ammunition. Now it was time to pull the trigger. I reached the top of the stairs and opened the door to the kitchen. Hunter was standing by the sink, pouring a bottle of Esther's vintage wine down the drain. Zoe was laughing, holding a garbage bag open. They froze when they saw me. They saw an old man covered in drywall dust holding a dirty suitcase. They expected me to be crying. They expected me to be begging. Hunter sneered. Look who crawled out of the dungeon. What is in the bag, Langston? Your old work clothes. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him. No, Hunter, I said, my voice calm and level. It is your severance package. I walked past them, placing the suitcase on the kitchen table right next to the eviction notice. Hunter frowned. He set the empty wine bottle down. What are you talking about, old man? I put my hand on the suitcase. I am talking about the end of the line, I said. And then I opened the latches. Click, click. The sound was the loudest thing in the room. Hunter stared at the stacks of cash inside the suitcase. His eyes bulged and his mouth hung open like a fish hooked on a line. For a moment, the arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, naked greed. Zoe let out a little gasp, her hands flying to her mouth, covering a smile that was terrifying in its avarice. "Look at this," Hunter whispered, reaching out to touch a bundle of hundreds. "There must be 50 grand here alone. Maybe more." Zoe laughed, a high, breathless sound. She grabbed a stack, fanning the bills near her face. "I knew it. I knew she was holding out on us, that stingy old woman. She had this the whole time and let us struggle. They were like vultures tearing at a carcass, completely ignoring the man who had opened the vault. They didn't care about the ledgers. They didn't care about the legal documents. They only saw the green." I watched them for a second, feeling a cold detachment. They were distracted. It was exactly what I needed. While they fought over who would count the money, I reached into the suitcase and palmed the small black USB drive taped to the manila folder. It was cool and light in my hand, but it felt heavier than the sledgehammer I had used downstairs. I backed away from the table. They didn't even notice. I walked into the small alcove off the kitchen that Esther used as a sewing nook. In the corner, sitting on a desk cluttered with thread spools and fabric scraps, was our ancient desktop computer. It was a bulky beige tower we had bought 10 years ago to email photos to relatives. We rarely used it, but Esther kept it plugged in. I sat down in her creaky swivel chair. My back was to the kitchen, but I could hear Hunter's excited voice counting. 10, 20, 30. God, Langston, where did she get this? I didn't answer. I pressed the power button on the tower. The fan whirred to life with a loud, dusty groan. The screen flickered, then glowed with the Windows logo. It seemed to take an eternity. I stared at the spinning loading circle, my heart matching its frantic pace. "Please," I whispered, "just work." Finally, the desktop appeared. I plugged the USB drive into the front port. The computer chimed. A folder window popped up on the screen. There was only one file inside, an audio file labeled Bedroom Cam Master 03-12-23, March 12th, 3 months ago. I reached for the old pair of headphones hanging on the monitor. I didn't want them to hear. Not yet. I needed to know what Esther had saved. I needed to know why this tiny drive was more important than the cash. I put the headphones over my ears, dampening the sound of Zoe's laughter in the kitchen. I clicked the file. The audio started with a hiss of static, then cleared. It was the sound of a door opening. I recognized the squeak of the hinge. It was our bedroom door. Then heavy footsteps, the rustle of fabric. "Is she asleep?" The voice was unmistakable. It was Hunter. It was a whisper, but the microphone picked it up clearly. "Yeah. The sedative kicked in an hour ago," a female voice replied. "Zoe. She is out cold." I stared at the screen, my hand gripping the mouse so hard the plastic creaked. They were in our bedroom while Esther was sleeping. There was a sound of a bottle rattling, the sound of pills shaking against plastic. "Okay, switch them," Hunter said. His voice was impatient. "Take the beta blockers out. Put the placebos in. Make sure the count is right. She checks everything." My blood ran cold. The world around me dissolved. The kitchen, the house, the air conditioning hum, it all vanished. There was only that voice in my ear. "Are you sure this will work?" Zoe asked. She didn't sound horrified. She sounded worried about getting caught. "The doctor said her heart is a ticking time bomb," Hunter replied. "Without the meds, her pressure will spike. One shock, one bad day, and pop. Nature takes its course. No autopsy required." "It is taking too long," Zoe complained. I heard the snap of a pill bottle cap. "I am tired of this, Hunter. I am tired of the smell of this house. I am tired of changing her sheets when she is too weak to get up. I want my life back. Just do it," Hunter snapped. "We need the house collateral by Friday. The loan sharks are not going to wait. If she doesn't kick the bucket soon, we are the ones who are dead." "Fine," Zoe said. "There. Done. Let's go." "Sleep tight," Esther, Hunter sneered. The sound of the door closing. The recording ended. I sat there in the sewing alcove, the headphones still on my ears, the silence of the finished track deafening. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by the hydraulic press in my old shop. They didn't just want the money. They didn't just want the house. They killed her. Esther didn't die of a heart attack in her sleep. She didn't pass away peacefully. She was murdered. Murdered by the daughter she had bailed out of jail. Murdered by the son-in-law she had saved from debt. They swapped her heart medication for sugar pills. They watched her get weaker. They watched her struggle for breath. and they complained that she was taking too long to die. I slid off the chair. My legs gave out. I hit the floor, my knees colliding with the hard linoleum. I curled into a ball, clutching the headphones to my chest. A sound ripped out of my throat. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, animalistic moan of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the sound of a man's soul being torn in half. Esther. My Esther. I remembered the last week of her life. She had been so tired. She had complained of headaches, of a racing heart. I told her to take her medicine. I brought her water. I watched her swallow the pills that I thought were saving her. I had fed her the poison. I had helped them kill her. Nausea rolled over me. I gagged dry, heaving against the carpet. The grief was a physical weight pressing me down, trying to bury me right there in the alcove. But then the grief shifted. It hardened. It crystallized into something cold and sharp. I stopped heaving. I wiped the bile from my mouth with the back of my hand. I opened my eyes. Through the gap in the alcove curtain, I could see them in the kitchen. Hunter was holding a stack of cash up to the light. Zoe was pouring another glass of wine, celebrating. They were celebrating the death they had engineered. The pain vanished. The sadness evaporated. In their place was a hollow, freezing void. I stood up. I didn't feel like an old man anymore. I felt like a machine. I ejected the USB drive. I put it in my pocket. I wasn't going to kill them. That was too easy. That was too quick. I was going to flay them alive. I was going to strip them of everything they loved, everything they wanted, everything they were. I was going to leave them naked and shivering in the ruins of their own greed. I reached for my phone. My hands were steady as stone. I dialed the number for Ms. Patel. Langston, she answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp. Do you have the documents? I have more than documents, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat. Dead. What do you mean, she asked. It is not a fraud case anymore, Ms. Patel, I said, staring at the back of Hunter's head. It is a homicide. There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Explain, she commanded. They swapped her meds, I said. I have the audio. They killed her for the insurance and the house. I heard the sound of a pen scratching violently against paper. Okay, Ms. Patel said. Her tone shifted from lawyer to general. The strategy changes. Now. Do not let them leave. Do not let them suspect you know. We need them to sign the confession. We need them to hang themselves. What do I do? I asked. Play the victim, she said. One last time. Make them think they have won. Make them think you are broken. Get them to sign the property transfer. Once their signatures are on that paper with the intent to defraud, we have them on intent. Combined with the recording, it is a death sentence. I understand, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor of the computer. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a man who had lost everything. Perfect. I shuffled out of the alcove. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble. I walked into the kitchen. Hunter looked up grinning, found a few more pennies in the piggy bank Langston. I looked at him. I looked at the man who murdered my wife. I surrender, I whispered, letting a tear I didn't feel roll down my cheek. You win. I can't fight you anymore. Zoe looked at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. What does that mean, Dad? It means, I said, sinking into a kitchen chair, burying my face in my hands. Call the lawyer, bring the papers, I will sign, just promise me you will take care of the house. Hunter laughed. He clapped his hands together. Finally he crowed. A moment of clarity. Don't worry, old man. We will take great care of it. Right after we sell it to the highest bidder. He grabbed his phone. I am calling the notary. We are doing this tonight. I stayed with my face in my hands, hiding the dry eyes, hiding the predator waiting behind the mask of the prey. Make the call, Hunter, I thought. Make the call. You are inviting the devil to dinner. Ms. Patel sat across from me at the kitchen table with a stillness that commanded respect. She placed her hand over the phone I was about to reach for and shook her head slowly. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. She told me that calling the police now would be a mistake. We had suspicions and we had loose threads, but we did not have a confession. To truly win this war, we needed indisputable proof. We needed them to sign their names to their own greed. She explained that the law required concrete evidence of intent. If we called the authorities now, Zoe and Hunter could claim it was all a misunderstanding or a family dispute. They could spin a narrative that I was a confused old man inventing stories. We could not afford to give them that wiggle room. We needed to hand them a shovel and let them dig the hole themselves. I understood what she was asking of me. It was not enough to be the victim. I had to become the actor in my own tragedy. I had to play the part they had written for me. I had to be the broken, defeated old man they believed I was. I looked at the phone as if it were a heavy stone. My heart was pounding not with fear but with a cold adrenaline. I was about to invite the wolves into the den. Ms. Patel slid a piece of paper toward me. It was a script of sorts. She told me to keep it simple. I needed to sound desperate. I needed to sound like a man who had lost his fight. I took a deep breath and dialed Zoe's number. The ringtone echoed in the silent kitchen. It rang once. It rang twice. Then her voice answered. It was sharp and impatient. She asked what I wanted. I let my voice crack. I forced a tremor into my words that felt uncomfortably natural. I told her that I was tired. I told her that I could not fight anymore. I said that they had won. I told her that I was ready to sign whatever she wanted as long as they promised to take care of me. I told her I was scared of being alone and that I just wanted this to end. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a silence filled with calculation. Then her voice changed. It became sickeningly sweet. It was the tone one uses with a disobedient child who has finally learned their lesson. She told me that I was making the right decision. She said that they only wanted what was best for me. She told me to stay put and not to go anywhere. She said they were coming over immediately to help me sort everything out. I hung up the phone and looked at Ms. Patel. She nodded once. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait. I went to the living room and sat in my favorite armchair. It was the chair where I used to read stories to Zoe when she was a little girl. It was the chair where I sat when I grieved for my wife. Now it would be the stage for my final performance. I slumped my shoulders. I practiced looking at my hands with a vacant stare. I wanted them to see a shell of a man. I wanted them to see exactly what they expected to see. The wait was short. Greed does not like to wait. Less than 30 minutes later, I heard the sound of a car engine roaring up the driveway. Tires screeched on the pavement. They were in a hurry to claim their prize. I heard car doors slam shut. I heard the click of heels on the walkway. They were not approaching with the solemnity of concerned children visiting a sick father. They were marching in with the energy of conquerors. The front door opened without a knock. Zoe and Hunter swept into the room. They brought a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive perfume and arrogance with them. Hunter was carrying a bottle of champagne. The sight of it made my stomach turn. They were here to strip me of my life's work, and they had brought alcohol to celebrate the occasion. It was a level of cruelty that I had not fully anticipated. Zoe looked radiant. Her eyes were bright with victory. She did not look at me with concern. She looked at the room. She looked at the paintings on the walls and the furniture as if she were already calculating their auction value. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was light and cold. She told me that she was glad I had finally come to my senses. She said that this was going to be so much better for everyone. Hunter was already at the dining table. He was spreading out documents. He uncorked the champagne bottle with a loud pop that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. He poured 2 glasses. He did not pour one for me. He joked that I probably shouldn't have any given my delicate condition. He laughed at his own joke. It was a dry, hollow sound. I remained in my chair. I kept my head down. I let my hands shake visibly on my lap. I asked them in a whisper what was going to happen to me. I asked if I would have to leave today. I wanted them to articulate their cruelty. I wanted Ms. Patel, who I knew was listening from the adjacent room, to hear every word. Zoe crouched down beside me. She spoke slowly and loudly as if I were deaf or simple. She told me not to worry about the details. She said they had found a wonderful facility for me. She called it a community. She said it was very safe and that I would have people to watch over me 24 hours a day. She made it sound like a resort, but I knew what she meant. She meant a warehouse for the unwanted. She meant a place where I would be out of sight and out of mind. Hunter called out from the table. He said the papers were ready. He told me to come over and sign before I changed my mind. He sounded impatient. He tapped his pen against the wood of the table. The rhythm was irritating. I stood up slowly. I leaned heavily on my cane even though I did not need it. I shuffled toward the table. I wanted this moment to stretch out. I wanted to see how far they would go. I sat down at the table. The papers were spread out before me. They were complex legal documents, transfer of deeds, power of attorney. Total relinquishment of assets. It was a death warrant for my independence. I looked at the papers, and then I looked at Hunter. He was grinning. It was a shark's grin. He pushed the pen toward my hand. He told me to sign on the dotted line. He told me that once I signed, I wouldn't have to worry about bills or maintenance ever again. He leaned in close. His breath smelled of mint and expensive liquor. He lowered his voice and whispered that if I was a good boy, I might even get extra dessert at the nursing home. He told me that I would love the soup there because I wouldn't even have to chew it. I felt a flash of pure white-hot rage. It took every ounce of my willpower not to strike him, but I swallowed the anger. I let it fuel my resolve. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled. I brought the tip of the pen to the paper. Then I stopped. I lifted my head and looked at Zoe. She was sipping her champagne, watching me with hungry eyes. I needed to ask one last question. I needed to know if there was any humanity left in her. I needed to know if the daughter I raised was truly dead. I asked her if she had any regrets. I asked her if she felt any sadness about doing this to her own father. I asked her if 40 years of love meant anything at all. The room went quiet for a second. Hunter rolled his eyes and checked his watch. But Zoe looked at me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation. I thought I saw a ghost of the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee. But then the mask slammed back into place. She smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She told me that her only regret was that I hadn't done this sooner. She said that I had been selfish to hold on to everything for so long. She said that I had lived my life and now it was their turn. She told me that love didn't pay the bills. She told me to sign the paper so we could all move on. That was the answer. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. There was no redemption here. There was no misunderstanding. There was only a hollow void where a heart should be. I looked down at the paper. I looked at the pen in my hand. I stopped trembling. I sat up straight. The time for acting was over. I placed the pen down on the table with a deliberate click. I pushed the papers away from me. I looked at Hunter, and then I looked at Zoe. My voice was no longer weak. It was strong and steady. It was the voice of a man who had built a life from nothing. I told them that there would be no signature today. Hunter frowned. He asked what I was talking about. He reached for my hand to force the pen back into it. He told me not to be difficult. I stood up. I did not use the cane. I stood to my full height. I told them that the only thing being signed today was their confession. Before they could react, the door to the kitchen opened. Ms. Patel walked in. She was holding a file folder, and she was not alone. Behind her, 2 police officers stepped into the room. Zoe dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp and final. The golden liquid spilled over the hardwood, spreading like a stain. Hunter froze. His face went pale. He looked from me to the police and back again. I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear replace the arrogance in her eyes. I saw the realization dawn on her. She had walked into the trap. She had dug her own grave. I told her that I had given her a chance. I told her that I had asked her if she had any regrets because I wanted to give her one last opportunity to show me she was human. But she had chosen greed. She had chosen cruelty. Ms. Patel placed the folder on the table right on top of the transfer documents. She told them that we had the recordings. She told them we had the toxicology reports from the doctor. She told them that we had the evidence of the embezzlement. She told them that the party was over. Hunter tried to speak. He stammered that this was a mistake. He tried to say that I was confused, but the officers were already moving forward. One of them took Hunter by the arm. The other approached Zoe. I watched as they were handcuffed. I watched the metal click around my daughter's wrists. It was the most painful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a father's heart breaking for the final time. But it was also the sound of justice. Zoe started to cry. She screamed at me. She called me a traitor. She begged me to tell them to stop. She reverted to being a child wanting her father to fix her mistake. But I stood still. I did not move to help her. I could not help her. She had made her choice. I looked at her one last time as they led her out the door. I told her that I did have a regret. I regretted that I hadn't seen the truth sooner. I regretted that I had let my love blind me to the monster she had become. The door closed behind them. The house was quiet again. The smell of spilled champagne hung in the air. I looked at Ms. Patel. She gave me a small, sad nod. It was done. I sat back down in my chair. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I was safe. The tip of the pen touched the paper. The ink bled slightly into the fibers, creating a tiny black stain that looked like a bullet hole. I held my breath. The room was so silent that I could hear the carbonation fizzing in the champagne glasses on the table. Hunter was leaning forward. His eyes were wide and hungry. He looked like a wolf watching a lamb step into a trap. Zoe was holding her breath too. Her hand was clutching the stem of her glass so tightly that her knuckles were white. They were focused entirely on the ink flowing from the pen. They were watching their inheritance become reality. They were watching my life dissolve into their bank accounts. I moved the pen slowly. I started to form the first letter of my name. It was a shaky line. I made sure my hand trembled violently. I wanted them to savor this moment. I wanted them to feel the victory right before I snatched it away. Hunter let out a small breath of anticipation. It was a greedy sound. It was the sound of a man who thinks he has won the lottery without buying a ticket. Then the world exploded with light. Blue and red flashes erupted through the front window. They cut through the dim living room like strobe lights in a nightmare. The lights danced across the walls and reflected in the spilled champagne on the floor. It was blinding, it was chaotic, and then came the sound. The siren did not start gradually. It chirped once. It was a loud, authoritative burst of sound that shook the window panes. Then it began to wail. It was a high, piercing shriek that destroyed the silence of the suburbs. It was followed by another siren, and then another. The cacophony was deafening. It sounded as if the entire police force had descended upon my front lawn. My hand stopped moving. I lifted the pen from the paper. I looked up at Hunter. The color drained from his face instantly. He looked at the window and then back at me. His mouth hung open. The arrogant smirk was gone. It was replaced by a look of pure confusion and rising panic. He stood up so fast that his chair tipped over backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash, but the sound was swallowed by the sirens outside. Zoe dropped her glass again. This time it did not shatter, but bounced on the rug, spilling the rest of the expensive wine. She put her hands over her ears. She looked like a frightened child during a thunderstorm. She looked at Hunter for answers, but he had none to give. Hunter ran to the window. He pulled back the curtain and looked out. The red and blue lights washed over his face, turning him into a ghoulish figure. He stumbled back as if he had been physically pushed. He turned to me. His eyes were wild. He shouted over the noise of the sirens. He asked what the hell was going on. He asked what I had done. I did not answer him. I simply capped the pen. I placed it gently on the table next to the unsigned documents. I sat back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. The trembling in my hands was gone. I looked at him with a calm that terrified him more than the police outside. I waited. The show was just beginning. The sirens cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. It was the silence before a storm breaks. We could hear car doors slamming outside. We heard heavy boots crunching on the gravel of the driveway. There were voices. They were low and professional. They were not the voices of neighbors coming to check on the noise. They were the voices of authority. Hunter rushed toward the front door. He was trying to regain control. He was trying to figure out how to spin this. He grabbed the handle, but before he could turn it, the door swung open. It did not burst open with violence. It opened with a terrifying slowness. It opened with the weight of the law behind it. Ms. Patel stood in the doorway. She was no longer the quiet observer sitting in the kitchen. She stood tall and immovable. She wore a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light. Her face was set in stone. She held a briefcase in one hand and a thick file in the other. She did not look at me. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Hunter. She did not come alone. Flanking her on the left was the chief of police. He was a large man in full uniform. His badge caught the light from the hallway. His hand rested casually near his belt. On her right stood a man in a gray suit who looked even more dangerous than the police officer. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a laptop bag. He was the senior auditor. He was the man who could trace a single stolen dollar through 1,000 bank accounts. Hunter backed away. He retreated into the living room until he bumped into the dining table. He looked small. He looked cornered. But his arrogance was a deep-rooted thing. It fought against his fear. He puffed out his chest. He tried to summon the bluster that had served him so well in the corporate world. He pointed a shaking finger at Ms. Patel. He shouted at them to get out. He yelled that this was private property. He screamed that they had no right to burst in here. He demanded to see a warrant. He turned to Zoe and told her to call their lawyer. He told them that they were trespassing and that he would have their badges for this. He was loud. He was aggressive. He was trying to shout down the inevitable. Zoe was paralyzed. She stood by the window, hugging herself. She looked from Hunter to me and then to the police. She saw the uniforms. She saw the cold calculation in the auditor's eyes. She realized that screaming would not help. She realized that the game had changed rules in the last 60 seconds. She did not reach for her phone. She just stared at Ms. Patel. Ms. Patel stepped into the room. The police chief and the auditor followed her. They moved like a single unit. They did not shout back. They did not pull weapons. They did not need to. Their presence filled the room and sucked the air out of it. Ms. Patel stopped in the center of the rug. She looked at the champagne stain on the floor. She looked at the unsigned papers on the table. Then she looked at Hunter. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with a clarity that cut through Hunter's shouting like a razor through silk. She told him to lower his voice. She told him that he was making a scene. She told him that shouting would not change the facts. Hunter sputtered. He turned red. He pointed at me. He yelled that I was his father-in-law and that I had invited them here. He yelled that they were in the middle of a private family legal matter. He tried to assert his dominance. He tried to claim ownership of the space. He said that this was his house now, or it would be in 5 minutes. The police chief stepped forward. He did not speak. He just stood there. He was a wall of blue uniform and authority. Hunter flinched. He took a step back. He looked at the auditor. The auditor was already taking notes on a pad. He was looking around the room, cataloging the items, cataloging the champagne, cataloging the people. Hunter looked back at me. He pleaded with his eyes. He wanted me to intervene. He wanted the weak old man to save him. He wanted me to tell them that it was all a misunderstanding. He wanted me to be the father who fixes everything. But I sat still. I watched him. I let him feel the weight of his own actions. Ms. Patel placed her briefcase on the dining table. She did it calmly. She moved the unsigned transfer documents aside as if they were trash. She opened her briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. She pulled out a single document. It was bound in a blue legal cover. It had a gold seal on the front. She held it up. She wanted them to see it. She wanted them to read the title. She turned to Hunter. Her eyes were cold. She told him that he was mistaken about a great many things. She told him that his understanding of the situation was fundamentally flawed. She took a step closer to him. Hunter tried to hold his ground, but he was trembling. Ms. Patel looked him up and down. She looked at him with the disdain one reserves for a thief caught with his hand in the jar. She spoke clearly. She enunciated every word. She said that he was screaming about trespassing. She said that he was very concerned about property rights. She said that was ironic. She opened the document. She pointed to a date stamp on the bottom of the first page. She asked him if he could read the date. Hunter squinted. He did not want to look, but he could not look away. He saw the date. It was from last month. It was from 30 days ago. Ms. Patel closed the document with a snap. She looked at Zoe and then back at Hunter. She delivered the blow that would shatter their reality. She announced that this house did not belong to Langston anymore. She said that this property and all the assets contained within it had been transferred exactly 30 days ago. She said that the owner was no longer the man sitting in the chair. Hunter stammered. He asked who owned it. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him. He asked what I had done. Ms. Patel smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. She told him that the legal owner of this estate was the Esther Carter Charity Foundation. She told him that the house was now a registered asset of a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of elder financial abuse. She took another step toward him. She invaded his personal space. She told him that I was merely a guest here. She told him that the foundation allowed me to reside here as a beneficiary. But she told him that he had no such permission. She looked him dead in the eye. She dropped the facade of politeness. She told him that he was not a guest. She told him that he had no invitation from the legal owners. She told him that he was right about one thing. She pointed a finger at his chest. She told him that someone was indeed breaking the law in this room. She told him that someone was indeed trespassing on private property. She turned to the police chief. She nodded at Hunter. She said that Mr. Hunter was currently trespassing on the property of the Esther Carter Charity Foundation. She said that he was attempting to defraud a charitable organization. She said that he was creating a disturbance on private land. Hunter looked at the police chief. The chief unhooked a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal rattled. It was the sound of reality crashing down. Hunter looked at the papers on the table, the papers he had tried to force me to sign. They were worthless. They were scrap paper. He had been trying to steal a house that I did not own. He had been trying to strong-arm a man who had already given everything away to protect it. Zoe let out a sob. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. She put her head in her hands. She understood. She understood that she had lost everything before she even walked through the door. She understood that the victory champagne she had brought was actually for her own funeral. Ms. Patel looked back at me. She gave me a small nod. It was a nod of respect. We had done it. We had led them to the edge of the cliff, and they had jumped off thinking they could fly. Now they were falling. And there was no one to catch them. The trap had snapped shut. The lesson had begun. The silence that followed Ms. Patel's declaration was fragile and short-lived. It was the kind of silence that exists in the split second after a pin is pulled from a grenade, but before the explosion tears the world apart. Hunter stood frozen near the dining table. His chest was heaving. His face had turned a deep and mottled shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his expensive shirt. His eyes, which had been filled with arrogance only moments ago, were now wide with a primal and terrified fury. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at the blue legal cover that proved he was trespassing. Then he looked at me. Something inside him snapped. It was a visible break. The veneer of the civilized businessman cracked and fell away, leaving only a cornered animal. He let out a sound that was half scream and half growl. It was a guttural noise of pure hatred. He did not care about the police. He did not care about the law. He only cared that I, the old man he had disregarded for years, had beaten him. He lunged. He moved with a speed born of desperation. He knocked the chair aside and it skittered across the floor. He charged toward me with his hands reaching out. His fingers were curled into claws. He screamed that I was a liar. He screamed that I had tricked him. He screamed that he was going to kill me. I did not move. I did not flinch. I sat in my armchair and watched him come. I watched the violence in his eyes and I felt nothing but a cold detachment. I was not afraid of him anymore. He was powerless. He never reached me. The police chief moved with a fluidity that belied his size. He took 2 large steps and intercepted Hunter halfway across the rug. He did not tackle him. He simply stepped into Hunter's path and used the man's own momentum against him. He grabbed Hunter's arm and twisted it behind his back in a single fluid motion. Hunter cried out in pain. His face was pressed against the wall next to the family portrait. The chief held him there effortlessly. The handcuffs came out again. This time they were not a threat. They were a reality. The metal clicked shut around Hunter's wrists. The sound was sharp and mechanical. Hunter thrashed against the wall. He kicked at the baseboards. He was shouting into the plaster. He yelled that this was a setup. He yelled that I was a senile old fool who didn't know what he was doing. He yelled that he would sue everyone in the room. He was incoherent. He was a man watching his life burn down and trying to put out the fire with gasoline. The chief pulled him back from the wall and forced him to stand. Hunter was panting. His hair was disheveled. His tie was crooked. He looked at me with eyes full of venom. He spat on the floor near my feet. He hissed that I would pay for this. He said that I had ruined everything. I looked at him. I looked at the man my daughter had married. I looked at the man who had treated me like a line item in a budget. I told him that I had not ruined anything. I told him that I had simply corrected an error. I told him that he was the one who had tried to build a castle on a foundation of sand. Hunter struggled against the chief's grip. He looked at Ms. Patel. He demanded that she tell the police to release him. He said that this was a misunderstanding over a property deed. He said that he could explain everything. He tried to regain his composure. He tried to put the mask back on, but it was too late. The mask was shattered on the floor along with the champagne glass. Ms. Patel did not even look at him. She turned slightly and gestured to the man on her right. The senior auditor stepped forward. He had remained silent during the physical altercation. He had stood perfectly still, clutching his laptop bag. Now he moved into the center of the room. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Hunter with a gaze that was devoid of emotion. It was a gaze that saw only numbers and facts. The auditor cleared his throat. The sound was small, but it commanded attention. He opened his bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. They were clipped together with a heavy black binder clip. He held the stack in his hands as if it were a weapon. He addressed Hunter by name. His voice was dry and precise. He stated that the issue of trespassing was a matter for the local police. He said that his concern was of a federal nature. He said that he was representing the Holdings Group Board of Directors. Hunter went still. The mention of his company froze him. He stared at the auditor. He asked what this was about. He asked why a corporate auditor was in my living room. The auditor opened the file. He began to read. He did not read with drama. He read with the flat tone of a man listing the ingredients of a recipe. He listed dates. He listed transaction numbers. He listed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and shell companies in Delaware. He detailed a systematic siphoning of corporate funds. He spoke of inflated invoices for consulting services that never happened. He spoke of ghost employees on the payroll. He spoke of diversions of capital into personal investment accounts. Hunter turned pale. His skin took on the color of old ash. He started to shake. This was not the shaking of rage. This was the shaking of terror. This was the secret he thought was buried deep in the encrypted servers of his office. This was the crime that carried a sentence measured in decades, not years. The auditor looked up from the papers. He looked Hunter in the eye. He stated the total amount. He said that the internal investigation had uncovered the embezzlement of $1.5 million over the last 18 months. Hunter tried to speak. His voice was a whisper. He denied it. He said it was a lie. He said that someone was framing him. He looked at Zoe. He looked at me. He looked for a way out. The auditor ignored the denial. He turned a page in the file. He said that the investigation had been triggered by a request from the majority shareholder. He said that the shareholder had noticed irregularities in the quarterly reports. He said that the shareholder had demanded a forensic audit 3 weeks ago. Hunter looked confused. He asked who the shareholder was. He said that the board was a group of investors. He said there was no single majority shareholder who watched that closely. The auditor smiled. It was a very small, very cold smile. He told Hunter that he was mistaken. He told Hunter that 40% of the voting stock had been acquired 5 years ago by a silent investor. He told Hunter that this investor had kept their identity shielded behind a trust. He said that the trust had a name. He said the name was the Esther Carter Trust. The name hung in the air. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. I saw Zoe flinch as if she had been slapped. She looked up from the floor where she was sitting. Her eyes were wide and wet. She whispered the name. She said it was impossible. Hunter looked at me. He looked at Ms. Patel. He looked at the auditor. He asked who Esther Carter was. He did not make the connection. He was so self-absorbed that he had never bothered to learn my wife's full name. He only knew her as the dead mother-in-law. The auditor closed the file. He delivered the final blow. He told Hunter that the Esther Carter Trust had voted this morning to terminate his employment effective immediately. He told Hunter that the trust had also voted to press full criminal charges for embezzlement and corporate fraud. He told Hunter that the district attorney was waiting for him at the station. Hunter sagged in the chief's grip. His legs gave out. The chief had to hold him up to keep him from falling. The fight was gone. The arrogance was gone. He was just a criminal who had been caught. He was a man who had thought he was the smartest person in the room, only to realize he was the only one who didn't know the rules of the game. I looked at Zoe. She was staring at me. Her face was a mask of shock and disbelief. She pushed herself up from the floor. She used the wall for support. She walked toward me slowly. She stopped a few feet away. She looked at me as if she had never seen me before. She stammered. She asked if it was true. She asked if Mom was the shareholder. She asked how that was possible. She said that Mom was just a teacher. She said that Mom didn't know anything about business. I stood up from my chair. My knees cracked, but I stood tall. I looked down at my daughter. I looked at the woman who had underestimated her own mother just as she had underestimated me. I told her that she was wrong. I told her that her mother was smarter than all of us combined. I told her that Esther saw things that others missed. I walked over to the fireplace. On the mantel sat a small framed photograph of Esther. She was smiling. Her eyes were bright and intelligent. I picked up the photo and held it. I turned back to Zoe. I told her the truth. I told her that Esther never trusted Hunter. I told her that from the moment Zoe brought him home, Esther saw the greed in his eyes. She saw the way he looked at our things. She saw the way he manipulated Zoe. I told her that Esther wanted to protect Zoe. She knew that she couldn't stop Zoe from marrying him. Zoe was stubborn and in love, so Esther did the only thing she could do. She decided to watch him. I explained that when Esther retired, she took her pension and her inheritance from her own parents, and she invested it. She didn't buy flashy cars or big houses. She bought stock. She bought stock in the company that had just hired Hunter. She bought enough to have a voice. She bought enough to demand answers. I told Zoe that for 5 years Esther read every report. She analyzed every spreadsheet. Even when she got sick, she kept watching. She made me promise to keep watching after she was gone. She made me promise to trigger the audit if I ever saw him slip. I looked at Hunter, who was now weeping silently. I told him that he hadn't been caught by a computer glitch. I told him he hadn't been caught by a random check. I told him he had been caught by the ghost of the woman he had disrespected for years. I told him that he thought we were weak. He thought we were simple old people who existed to be used. I told him that was his fatal mistake. He forgot that we had lived a lifetime before he was even born. He forgot that we knew how to survive. He forgot that we knew how to protect what was ours. Zoe started to cry again. She looked at the photo in my hand. She asked why we didn't tell her. She asked why we let her live a lie. I looked at her with pity. I told her that we tried. I reminded her of the warnings. I reminded her of the times we asked if she was happy. I reminded her of the times we asked about their finances. I told her that she never listened. I told her that she chose him over us every single time. I told her that we couldn't save her from herself. We could only prepare for the crash. And now the crash had happened. The police chief cleared his throat. He said it was time to go. He pulled Hunter toward the door. Hunter dragged his feet. He looked back at me one last time. There was no hate in his eyes anymore, only despair. The auditor followed them out. He nodded to me as he passed. He said he would be in touch regarding the legal proceedings. Zoe stood alone in the center of the room. She looked at the empty doorway where her husband had just been taken away. She looked at the spilled champagne. She looked at the unsigned papers that would have given them everything. She looked at me. She took a step forward. She opened her mouth to speak. She wanted to ask for help. She wanted to ask for money. She wanted to ask for a place to stay. I saw it all forming on her lips. I raised my hand. I stopped her before she could say a word. I told her that the house belonged to the charity now. I told her that the assets were frozen. I told her that I had nothing to give her. I told her that she had a husband to support. I told her that she should probably call a lawyer. I told her that she should go. Zoe stared at me for a long moment. Then she turned around. She walked out the door. She did not look back. She walked out into the night where the police lights were still flashing, painting the neighborhood in shades of red and blue. I closed the door. I locked it. I turned off the porch light. I went back to the living room. I picked up the pen from the table. I put it in my pocket. I looked at the photo of Esther. I touched the glass. I whispered to her. I told her that we got him. I told her that it was over. I told her that she could rest now. Miss Patel came out of the kitchen. She had been making tea. She placed a steaming mug on the table. She didn't say anything. She just sat down in the chair opposite me. We sat in silence. We sat in the house that was no longer mine but was finally safe. We sat in the quiet aftermath of the storm, and for the first time in months the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a debt paid in full. The room was thick with the scent of disaster. Hunter stood near the doorway with his expensive suit rumpled and his hands cuffed behind his back. He was breathing hard like a bull that had just run into a wall. The realization of his financial ruin was settling over him like a shroud. The auditor was packing away the evidence of the embezzlement. The police chief was speaking into his radio requesting transport. The machinery of justice was grinding forward, and it was loud and inevitable. But there was still one person in the room who thought she could escape. There was still one actor who believed she could improvise a new ending to this play. Zoe turned away from her husband. She turned her back on the man she had conspired with for years. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide and filled with a sudden, desperate moisture. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look she used when she broke a vase as a child. It was the look she used when she needed money for a car. It was the look of calculated innocence. She rushed toward me. She fell to her knees at the side of my chair. She grabbed my hand. Her palms were damp and cold. She squeezed my fingers. She looked up at me with tears spilling over her lashes. She begged me to listen. She told me that I had to understand. She said that she didn't know about the embezzlement. She said she didn't know Hunter was stealing from the company. She told me that he was a monster. She said that he had controlled her. She said that he had forced her to go along with the plan for the house. She tightened her grip on my hand. Her nails dug into my skin. She pleaded with me to save her. She called me daddy. It was a word she hadn't used in 20 years. It was a weaponized word. She used it to cut through my defenses. She told me that she was just a victim in all of this. She said that she was scared of him. She said that she only wanted to protect me, but Hunter wouldn't let her. I looked down at her. I looked at the top of her head. I remembered braiding her hair when she was small. I remembered the smell of her shampoo. I remembered the overwhelming love I felt for her. But that memory was distant now. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger. The woman kneeling before me was not that child. This woman was a stranger who shared her face. I listened to her lies. They poured out of her like poisoned water. She threw her husband to the wolves without a second thought. She claimed ignorance. She claimed coercion. She claimed innocence. It was pathetic. It was the frantic thrashing of a drowning rat climbing over the body of another to reach the surface. Hunter watched her from the doorway. His face twisted. He heard her betrayal. He heard her painting him as the sole villain. His jaw worked silently. He looked at her with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated loathing. He saw her for what she was, perhaps for the first time. He saw that her loyalty ended exactly where her self-interest began. I let her finish. I let her cry and beg until she ran out of breath. I let the silence return to the room. I gently pulled my hand away from hers. I did not do it with anger. I did it with the indifference of removing a dead leaf from a coat. I told her that I could almost believe her regarding the money. I told her that Hunter was indeed greedy and controlling. I told her that it was plausible she didn't know about the corporate accounts. Zoe's face lit up with hope. She thought she had won. She thought she had found the crack in my armor. She started to nod eagerly. She wiped her eyes. She opened her mouth to thank me, but I raised a hand to stop her. I told her that there was one thing she could not blame on Hunter. I told her there was one line she had crossed all on her own. I looked at Ms. Patel. She reached into her briefcase again. She pulled out a small digital recorder. It was a black rectangle no bigger than a pack of gum. She placed it on the table. The plastic clicked against the wood. I told Zoe that the house has ears. I told her that when I started to suspect them, I didn't just hire a lawyer. I hired a surveillance expert. I told her that I needed to know if my memory was truly failing or if I was being helped along the path to dementia. Zoe froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin gray and waxy. She stared at the recorder as if it were a bomb. She knew what was on it. She remembered the conversations. She remembered the moments when she thought I was asleep or out of the room. I pressed the play button. The audio was crystal clear. There was no static. It cut through the room with terrifying precision. First, there was the sound of a pill bottle rattling. It was the distinct sound of plastic shaking against plastic. Then came Hunter's voice. He asked if she was sure about this. He sounded hesitant. He asked if it was dangerous. Then came Zoe's voice. It was not the voice of the crying daughter kneeling on the floor. It was calm. It was cold. It was efficient. Her voice filled the room. She told Hunter to stop being a coward. She said that the doctor had prescribed the blue pills for his heart, but the white ones were sedatives. She said that if they swapped them, he would be confused during the day. She said he would sleep more. She said he would be easier to handle. The recording continued. There was the sound of pills being poured out. Zoe's voice spoke again. She said that if he was groggy, he wouldn't ask questions about the bank statements. She said that if he seemed senile, the court would grant the guardianship faster. She laughed on the recording. It was a short, sharp laugh. She said that it wasn't like I had much of a life anyway. She said I was just taking up space. I stopped the playback. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. The police chief looked at Zoe with open disgust. The auditor looked away, unable to witness the depth of the moral rot. Ms. Patel stood like a statue, her face grim and satisfied. Zoe did not move. She remained on her knees, but she was no longer begging. She was paralyzed by the echo of her own malice. The evidence hung in the air. There was no spinning this. There was no blaming Hunter. It was her voice. It was her plan. She had conspired to drug her own father to hasten his decline. She had tried to steal my mind before she stole my house. I looked at her. I felt a profound hollowness in my chest. I told her that she could lie about the money. I told her she could lie about the house. But she could not lie about this. I told her that I had listened to that recording every night for a week. I told her that it was the fuel that kept me going. I told her that hearing her voice plotting my demise killed the last part of me that wanted to save her. Zoe looked up at me. Her eyes were empty. The mask was gone. There was nothing left behind it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then came the roar. It came from the doorway. It was a sound of pure animal rage. Hunter had been listening too. He had heard her voice on the tape. He had heard her taking the lead. He had heard the proof that she was not a victim but the architect of their cruelty. And he had just heard her try to pin it all on him. He broke. The handcuffs could not contain his fury. He threw his weight forward. He slammed into the police chief, knocking the large man off balance. He broke free from the grip of the officer. He charged across the room. He was screaming. He was not screaming words anymore. He was screaming raw sound. He looked at Zoe with eyes that burned with madness. Zoe screamed. She tried to scramble backward. She tried to get up, but her dress tangled in her legs. She fell back onto the floor. Hunter reached her. He did not punch her. He fell on top of her. His hands went for her throat. He squeezed. He screamed that it was her fault. He screamed that she was the one who wanted the house. He screamed that it was her mother's money. He screamed that she had dragged him into this. He screamed that she was a witch. Zoe clawed at his face. She gasped for air. Her face turned red, then purple. She kicked and thrashed, but he was heavy and fueled by adrenaline. They rolled on the floor in a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. It was a scene of utter degradation. The two people who had thought themselves superior to everyone were now tearing each other apart like wild dogs. The police chief recovered his balance instantly. He shouted a command. He drew the yellow taser from his belt. He did not hesitate. He aimed at Hunter's back. There was a loud pop like a firecracker. 2 small barbs flew through the air. They hit Hunter in the shoulder and the lower back. The electrical current surged through him. Hunter went rigid. His back arched. His hands flew off Zoe's throat. He fell sideways off her. He convulsed on the floor. His screams turned into a low, guttural groan. The fight went out of him instantly. Zoe rolled away. She was coughing and gasping. She clutched her throat. She looked at Hunter twitching on the floor, and then she looked at the police. She was terrified. The chief stepped in. He holstered the taser and knelt on Hunter's back. He checked the handcuffs. They held fast. He pulled Hunter up to his knees. Hunter was dazed. He was drooling slightly. The arrogance was burned out of him. The second officer moved to Zoe. He pulled her to her feet. He spun her around. He pulled her hands behind her back. He took out his own cuffs. Zoe started to cry again. It was a high, keening sound. She asked what was happening. She asked why she was being arrested. The officer told her she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault for elder abuse and for the attempted poisoning of a vulnerable adult. He tightened the cuffs. They hauled them toward the door. Hunter stumbled, his legs still weak from the shock. Zoe wept uncontrollably. They passed by me. They passed by the table with the unsigned papers and the spilled champagne. They passed by the life they had tried to steal. I did not look away. I watched them go. I watched my daughter being led out of my home in handcuffs. I watched the man she married being dragged out like a sack of garbage. Hunter looked back one last time. His eyes met mine. There was no hate left in them. There was only the empty stare of a man who had lost his soul. Zoe did not look back. She hung her head in shame. The front door opened. The flashing lights from outside flooded the hallway again. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. They watched in silence as the police cars swallowed my family. They watched as the squad cars pulled away, their sirens silent now, leaving only the red taillights fading into the darkness. The chief closed the door. The latch clicked. The house was sealed. The storm was over. I sat in my chair. I looked at the empty room. I looked at the mess on the floor. I looked at Miss Patel. She was putting the recorder back into her briefcase. She closed the latches with a soft snap. She looked at me. She asked if I was all right. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. The oppressive weight that had been sitting on my chest for months was gone. I felt light. I felt tired. But mostly I felt a strange and quiet peace. I told her yes. I told her that I was fine. I told her that the house was finally quiet. I told her that the rats were gone. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty street. I touched the cold glass. I whispered goodbye to Zoe. I whispered goodbye to the daughter I once knew. She was gone long before the police took her away. I turned back to the room. It was time to clean up. It was time to wash the champagne from the rug. It was time to throw away the papers. It was time to start living again. I had my house. I had my mind. And for the first time in a long time, I had my freedom. The steel doors slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. The sound was heavy and industrial. It was the sound of a world that existed apart from the rest of society. The air in the visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. It was a cold, antiseptic scent that burned the back of my throat. I sat on a metal stool that was bolted to the floor. The seat was hard and unforgiving. Between me and the empty chair on the other side was a thick sheet of reinforced glass. It was scratched and smudged by 1,000 desperate conversations. It had been 90 days since the night the police took them away. 3 months of silence. 3 months of legal maneuvering and depositions. 3 months of sleeping in a house that finally felt like mine again. I had not spoken to Zoe since that night. I had let the lawyers handle the arraignment. I had let the press handle the scandal. But today I needed to see her. I needed to see the result of her choices with my own eyes. I needed closure. The door on the other side of the partition buzzed. It was a harsh, angry sound. A guard stepped in first. He looked bored. Then Zoe walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who shuffled into the room was a ghost of the daughter I knew. The designer dresses were gone. They had been replaced by a shapeless orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, which had always been perfectly styled and colored, was now dull and lank. It was pulled back into a severe ponytail that exposed her face. Her face was the most shocking part. Without the expensive makeup and the facials, she looked older. She looked hard. There were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Her skin was sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights. The arrogance that had defined her for so long had been stripped away. In its place was a raw, nervous energy. She looked like a trapped animal that had exhausted itself throwing its body against the cage. She sat down. She did not look at me at first. She looked at the counter. She looked at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick. It was a nervous habit she had as a child, which she had conquered years ago. Now it was back. She slowly lifted her eyes to meet mine. I expected to see anger. I expected to see the same hatred she had shown me the night of the arrest. But there was no fire left in her. Her eyes were empty and glassy. She picked up the black phone receiver mounted on the wall. Her movements were slow and heavy. I picked up my receiver. The plastic felt greasy against my ear. I waited for her to speak. I waited for the accusations. She just breathed for a moment. I could hear the rasp of her breath through the line. Then she spoke. Her voice was thin and cracked. She asked me why I came. She asked if I had come to gloat. She asked if I wanted to see her suffering. I told her no. I told her that I did not take pleasure in this. I told her that seeing my only child in a cage was the greatest failure of my life. I told her that I came because she had sent a request through her lawyer. I told her that I came to listen. Zoe flinched. She looked away for a moment. She seemed to be gathering herself. She seemed to be trying to summon the old Zoe, the Zoe who could manipulate and charm. She straightened her back slightly. She licked her dry lips. She leaned closer to the glass. She started to speak faster. The words tumbled out of her. She told me that it was horrible in there. She told me about the noise and the food. She told me that she was scared. She told me that she didn't belong there with those people. She said it was all a mistake. She said that Hunter had tricked everyone, including her. She was trying to rewrite history again. She was trying to spin the narrative. But she lacked the energy to make it convincing. The desperation was too close to the surface. It bled through her words. She wasn't commanding me anymore. She was pleading. She told me that her public defender was an idiot. She said he wanted her to take a plea deal. She said he wanted her to serve 5 years. She said she couldn't do 5 years. She said she would die in there. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. She asked me to help her. She asked me to get her a real lawyer. She asked me to use the money. I stayed silent. I let her talk. I let her reveal the only thing that still mattered to her. Even in prison, even facing ruin, she was still thinking about the money. She was still thinking about what I could give her. She pressed her hand against the glass. Her palm left a fog on the surface. She begged me. She called me daddy again. She said that she knew Mom had left money. She said that the auditor had mentioned the shares. She said that the Esther Carter Trust must be worth millions. She told me that I could afford the best defense team in the state. She told me that a good lawyer could get the charges reduced. She said they could argue coercion. She said they could blame everything on Hunter. She said that she could be out in a year if I just signed the check. She started to cry. These were not the fake tears of the living room. These were tears of pure terror. She realized that her life was balancing on the edge of a knife and I was the one holding the handle. She told me that I couldn't leave her there. She told me that I was her father. She told me that fathers protect their daughters. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing she was in a cell. She said that she was sorry. She said it over and over again. She said she was sorry about the house. She said she was sorry about the pills. She said she was sorry she ever met Hunter. She bargained with me. She promised that if I got her out, she would go away. She promised she would never ask for anything again. She promised she would take care of me. It was painful to watch. It was a display of complete moral collapse. She was willing to say anything. She was willing to promise anything. But she never once asked how I was. She never once asked about the damage she had done to my health. She only cared about her own survival. I listened until she ran out of words. I listened until her begging turned into sobbing gasps. I waited for the silence to settle between us again. I looked at her through the scratched glass. I saw the reflection of my own face superimposed over hers. I looked old and tired, but my eyes were clear. I leaned into the receiver. I spoke softly. I told her that she was right about one thing. I told her that her mother had indeed left a significant amount of money. I told her that the Esther Carter Trust was very well funded. Zoe stopped crying. She sniffled. A spark of hope ignited in her eyes. It was a hungry spark. She thought she had broken me. She thought that parental guilt had finally won out. She leaned in closer. She waited for the number. She waited for the salvation. I told her that Esther had written a very specific clause into the trust documents. I told her that Esther had anticipated a day like this. I told her that her mother knew that if Zoe ever found out about the money, she would try to get it. I told her that the trust had a beneficiary. I saw Zoe's eyes light up. She nodded eagerly. She thought the beneficiary was her. I told her that the funds were designated for a specific purpose. I told her that the money was not for lawyers. I told her that the money was not for bail. I told her that the money was not for her comfort. I watched the hope drain out of her face as I delivered the verdict. I told her that the Esther Carter Trust was established solely for the purpose of restitution. I told her that every single cent of the dividends and the principal was legally bound to repay the victims of Hunter's embezzlement. I told her that the money was currently being used to save the pensions of the employees Hunter had robbed. I told her that the money was being used to pay the vendors Hunter had stiffed. Zoe looked confused. She shook her head. She said there must be something left. She said there must be a personal portion for the family. I told her there was. I told her that there was a personal stipend allocated for her. She brightened again. The roller coaster of greed was making her dizzy. She asked how much. She asked when she could get it. I told her the condition. I told her that Esther had placed a time lock on the inheritance. I told her that the stipend would only be released after she had proven she could live without it. I told her the date. I told her that she would not receive a single penny until her 60th birthday. Zoe stared at me. Her mouth fell open. She did the math in her head. She realized that was nearly 30 years away. She realized that she would be an old woman. She realized that she would have to serve her time. She realized that she would have to get out and work. She realized that she would have to survive on her own for decades. I told her that this was her mother's final lesson. I told her that Esther wanted her to learn the value of a dollar earned through sweat, not theft. I told her that Esther wanted her to build character, not a portfolio. I told her that the lawyers for the trust had been instructed to fight any attempt to access the funds early. I told her that if she tried to sue the trust, the legal fees would come out of her future stipend until there was nothing left. Zoe slammed her hand against the glass. The thud was dull and heavy. She screamed at me. She screamed that it wasn't fair. She screamed that it was cruel. She screamed that we were punishing her from the grave. I looked at her calmly. I told her that it was not punishment. I told her it was justice. I told her that she had tried to steal my end-of-life comfort, so we had ensured she would have to earn hers. I told her that the public defender was her lawyer now. I told her that she should listen to him. I told her that 5 years was a long time, but it was enough time to think. It was enough time to change. She started to curse me. The veneer of the victim fell away completely. The ugly entitlement came rushing back. She called me names. She spat venom at the glass. She showed me exactly who she was one last time. I did not get angry. I did not yell back. I simply nodded. I had seen what I needed to see. The daughter I loved was gone. The woman in the orange jumpsuit was a stranger who needed to learn how to be human again. I stood up. My knees ached from the hard floor, but I didn't mind. I hung the receiver back on the wall. The click was final. It disconnected her voice. It turned her screaming into a silent pantomime behind the glass. I looked at her for a long moment. I memorized her face. I wanted to remember her not with hate, but with a distant pity. I placed my hand on the glass for a second. It was a gesture of goodbye. Then I turned my back. I walked toward the heavy steel door. I heard her pounding on the glass behind me. I heard the muffled sounds of her screaming for me to come back, but I kept walking. I signaled the guard. The buzzer sounded. The lock disengaged with a heavy clank. I pushed the door open. I walked out of the visiting room. I walked down the long gray corridor. I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The air outside smelled of rain and wet pavement. It smelled fresh. I took a deep breath. I walked to my car where Ms. Patel was waiting. She didn't ask how it went. She saw my face, and she knew. I got in the car. I buckled my seatbelt. I looked at the prison walls one last time. Then I looked forward. I told Ms. Patel to drive. I told her that we had a lot of work to do with the charity. I told her that life was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it. The house was quiet when I returned, but it was not the silence of the tomb anymore. It was the silence of a blank canvas waiting for paint. The air no longer smelled of Hunter's cloying cologne or the sour scent of Zoe's desperation. It smelled of lemon polish and open windows. Ms. Patel dropped me off at the curb and told me she would give me a few days. She said I needed time to breathe. She was right. I stood on the porch and watched her drive away. I was alone in the big house for the first time in months, but I did not feel lonely. I felt like a captain who had just weathered a hurricane and was finally standing on the deck under a clear sky. I walked inside. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. I walked from room to room, reclaiming my territory. I touched the walls. I opened the curtains that Hunter had kept drawn. I let the light in. The shadows of the past few months tried to cling to the corners, but the light chased them away. I went into the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing over the sink, watching the birds in the backyard. It was a simple meal, but it tasted better than any banquet because it was eaten in freedom. The next morning, I started the work. I did not want to just live in the house. I wanted to restore it. I wanted to bring back the spirit of the home that Esther and I had built before the rot set in. I hired a team of contractors. I told them I wasn't interested in modernizing. I wasn't interested in increasing the resale value. I told them I wanted to go back in time. I led them to the room that Zoe had turned into a guest bedroom for her society friends. It had been sterile and beige with furniture that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. I told the workers to tear it all out. I told them to strip the carpet and reveal the hardwood underneath. This was going to be the music room again. For 2 weeks, the house was filled with the sounds of saws and hammers. It was a good noise. It was the sound of creation, not destruction. I watched them work. I watched them sand the floors until the wood glowed like honey. I watched them paint the walls a soft blue, the exact shade of Esther's eyes. I had them install bookshelves from floor to ceiling just the way she had always wanted. When the room was finished, I had the piano brought out of storage. It was a Steinway that we had bought for our 10th anniversary. Zoe had banished it to a climate-controlled unit, saying it took up too much space. Watching the movers wheel it back into its rightful place felt like welcoming a family member home. I sat down on the bench. I lifted the cover. The keys were cool under my fingers. I played a C major chord. The sound resonated through the empty house, rich and full. It was the heartbeat of the home returning. I spent the next few days filling the shelves. I unpacked boxes of books that had been taped shut for years. I found Esther's sheet music. I found her collection of vinyl records. I placed her favorite chair by the window where the light was best for reading. I sat in my own chair opposite hers. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was no longer empty. It was filled with memories. It was filled with her. I told her that we were home. I told her that the house was ours again. But Esther was not done with me yet. She had one more surprise waiting in the wings. She knew me better than I knew myself. She knew that once the war was over, I would be at risk of fading away. She knew that a man without a battle needs a journey. I decided to clear out the attic. It was the last stronghold of the clutter we had accumulated over 40 years. I was moving boxes of old clothes when I found it. It was an old leather suitcase tucked away in the farthest corner under the eaves. It was covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked like gray velvet. I recognized it immediately. It was the suitcase we had taken on our honeymoon. I dragged it out into the light. The leather was cracked and dry, but the latches still worked. I clicked them open. Inside, there were old sweaters and a few photo albums. I started to take them out, intending to donate the clothes. When I reached the bottom of the suitcase, my hand hit something hard. It didn't feel like the bottom of a suitcase. It felt uneven. I pressed down. There was a click. A false bottom popped up. Popped. My heart started to race. Esther loved puzzles. She loved hiding things for me to find. I lifted the false bottom. Underneath, resting on a bed of blue velvet, was a large manila envelope and a set of car keys. I picked up the envelope first. It was heavy. My name was written on the front in Esther's elegant script. I sat down on the dusty floor of the attic. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was from anticipation, not rage. I opened the envelope. Inside was a brochure. It was glossy and expensive. It was for a world cruise on the Queen Mary 2. It was the trip we had talked about for 20 years. We had talked about sailing around the globe when we retired. We had planned to see the pyramids and the Great Wall and the fjords of Norway. But then life happened. Bills happened, Zoe happened, and then the sickness happened. We never went. I flipped through the brochure. A piece of paper fell out. It was a receipt. It was paid in full. It was for the owner's suite. It was for a departure date that was 3 months from now. She had booked it before she died. She had booked it for 1. She knew. She knew she wouldn't make it. But she wanted me to go. She didn't want me to sit in this house and wait to die. She wanted me to see the world for both of us. Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away and looked at the car keys. They were heavy metal keys with the Ford emblem on them. They looked brand new. Attached to the ring was a small tag. It had an address on it. It was for a storage facility on the other side of town. I stood up. I put the envelope in my pocket. I gripped the keys tightly. I left the attic and went straight to my car. I drove to the address on the tag. My mind was racing. I remembered the Mustang. I had a 1967 Ford Mustang when I was young. It was cherry red. It was my pride and joy. I sold it 30 years ago to pay for Zoe's college tuition. It was the only time I ever saw Esther cry over a material object. She loved that car as much as I did. I arrived at the storage facility. I found the unit number. I stood in front of the metal roll-up door. I put the key in the padlock. It turned smoothly. I lifted the door. It rattled up into the ceiling, letting the afternoon light flood into the dark concrete space. I stopped breathing. There it was. It wasn't just a car. It was a time machine. Sitting in the center of the unit under the fluorescent lights was a 1967 Ford Mustang. It was cherry red. It was polished to a mirror shine. It looked exactly like the one I had sold. No, it looked better. I walked toward it slowly, as if it were a mirage that might disappear if I moved too fast. I reached out and touched the fender. The metal was cool and solid. I looked through the window. The interior was pristine white leather. There was a ribbon on the steering wheel. I opened the driver's side door. The smell hit me. It was the smell of old leather and gasoline and nostalgia. It was the smell of my youth. On the dashboard was a note. I picked it up. It read simply, "You sacrificed your dream for our daughter. I bought it back. Drive fast, Langston. Love, Esther." I sat in the driver's seat. I put the key in the ignition. I turned it. The engine roared to life with a deep, throaty rumble that shook the concrete floor. It was the sound of a beast waking up. I gripped the steering wheel. I laughed. I laughed until tears ran down my face. She had found it. She had found the exact car, and she had it restored. She had been planning this for years. While I was worrying about the electric bill, she was building me a getaway car. I drove the Mustang home. I drove it with the windows down and the wind in my hair. I felt younger than I had in decades. I felt alive. I parked it in the garage next to my sensible sedan. The sedan looked like an appliance next to a work of art. I went into the house. I felt a sense of completion. I had peace. I had a journey ahead of me. And I had my ride. But the day was not over. Just as I was making tea, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the door. Standing on the porch was a woman I had never seen before. She was tall and elegant, wearing a sharp business suit. She held a briefcase. She introduced herself as Sarah. She said she was Esther's private secretary. I invited her in. We sat in the newly restored music room. She looked around with approval. She said that Esther would have loved what I did with the place. She placed her briefcase on the coffee table. She told me that there was one final piece of business to attend to. She said that Ms. Patel handled the legal defense and the investigation. But Sarah handled the assets. She opened the briefcase. She pulled out a binder that was 3 inches thick. She handed it to me. It was heavy. She told me that the Esther Carter Trust was not just a savings account. She said it was a fully diversified investment fund. She said that Esther had an uncanny knack for picking stocks. She said that Esther had invested in tech startups in the 90s. She had invested in real estate in the early 2000s. Sarah looked me in the eye. She told me the valuation of the fund. The number she said was so large it didn't sound real. It was a number with 9 figures. I stared at her. I asked her if she was joking. I asked her how a schoolteacher could amass a fortune like that. Sarah smiled. She said that Esther was not just a schoolteacher. She said Esther was a visionary who read financial reports for fun. She said Esther lived modestly because she wanted to build something that would last for generations. She wanted to build a legacy that could change the world. She told me that the bylaws of the trust had changed upon the successful prosecution of Hunter. She said that the restrictive clauses were lifted for me. She said that I was now the sole trustee and chairman of the board. She told me that I was not a retired old man living on a pension. She told me that I was now one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the state. She opened the binder to the first page. It was a mission statement written by Esther. It outlined the goals of the fund. It was dedicated to education, to legal defense for the elderly, and to recovering stolen assets for victims of fraud. Sarah told me that my job was not to sit on the money. My job was to give it away. My job was to find people like me, people who were being taken advantage of, and give them the sword and shield they needed to fight back. I looked at the binder. I looked at the car keys on the table. I looked at the cruise tickets. I realized then that Esther hadn't just saved me. She had reinvented me. She had given me a second act that was bigger than the first. I closed the binder. I looked at Sarah. I told her that we had work to do. I told her that I wanted to start immediately. I told her that there were other hunters out there and I was going to find them. I am Langston Carter. I am 75 years old. I have a fast car, a ticket to the world, and $1 billion war chest. And for the memory of my wife, and for the sake of every forgotten parent out there, I am just getting started. The morning of the sentencing arrived with a sky so blue it looked like it had been painted by a child. There were no clouds to hide the sun. There was no fog to obscure the truth. It was a day of absolute clarity. I stood in front of the garage mirror adjusting my tie. It was a silk tie that Esther had bought me 20 years ago. It was deep crimson. She always said it was my power tie. I looked at the man in the mirror. The lines on his face were still there. The hair was still white. But the posture was different. The stoop was gone. The eyes were sharp. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out forged in steel. I walked out to the garage. The cherry-red Mustang sat there waiting for me. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights. It looked like a predator ready to hunt. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the roof. This car was more than a machine. It was a symbol. It was the physical manifestation of the life I had put on hold and the life I was now reclaiming. I slid into the driver's seat. The white leather creaked, welcoming me. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. It was a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up my spine. It was the heartbeat of my new existence. I backed out of the driveway. I did not look at the house. The house was safe now. It was waiting for me. But today, I had business to finish. I drove toward the courthouse. I did not drive like an old man. I drove with confidence. I let the engine sing as I merged onto the highway. I felt the power of the car responding to my touch. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control of my own destiny. When I arrived at the courthouse, the scene was chaotic. The press had descended like a flock of birds. There were vans with satellite dishes and reporters with microphones. The story of the wealthy son-in-law who tried to defraud his elderly father-in-law had captured the public imagination. It was a modern tragedy, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. I pulled the Mustang up to the curb right in front of the main steps. I did not look for a parking spot in the back. I wanted them to see me. I wanted Hunter to know that I was not hiding. I stepped out of the car. The cameras started flashing immediately. It was a blinding storm of white light. The reporters shouted questions. They asked how I felt. They asked if I was happy. They asked about the money. I did not answer them. I simply buttoned my jacket. I put on a pair of dark sunglasses. I walked up the marble steps. Ms. Patel and Sarah were waiting for me at the top. They looked like my Praetorian guard. Miss Patel nodded to me. Sarah handed me a bottle of water. We turned and walked into the building together. The courtroom was packed. Every bench was filled. There were people standing in the back. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of old wood and floor wax. I walked to the front row. I sat down in the reserved seat. I looked across the aisle. Hunter was already there. He was sitting at the defense table. He looked small. The expensive suit he wore hung loosely on him as if he had shrunk inside it. His skin was gray. He was staring at the table. He did not look up when I entered. He knew I was there. He could feel it. The bailiff announced the judge. We all stood. The judge was a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She sat down and opened the file. She looked at Hunter. She looked at me. She began to speak. She reviewed the charges: fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, conspiracy. The list was long and damning. She spoke about the breach of trust. She spoke about the calculated cruelty. She spoke about the systemic theft of corporate funds. Hunter's lawyer tried to speak. He tried to argue for leniency. He talked about stress and financial pressure. It was a weak argument. It crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Then it was my turn. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood up. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at the judge, and then I turned and looked at Hunter. He finally lifted his head. His eyes met mine. There was fear there. Deep, terrified fear. I told the court that I did not want to talk about my pain. I told them that my pain was private. I told them that I wanted to talk about justice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a document prepared by the Esther Carter Trust. I unfolded it slowly. The sound of the crisp paper was loud in the silent room. I announced that the forensic accountants had finished their work. I announced that we had recovered nearly all of the assets that Hunter had stolen and hidden in offshore accounts. I stated the amount. It was a staggering sum. Hunter flinched. He looked at his lawyer. He seemed to think that maybe, just maybe, he could still claim some of it later. Maybe he thought he could fight for it after prison. I looked directly at him. I told him that he loved money more than anything in the world. I told him that money was his god. I told him that the greatest punishment for a man like him was not prison, it was poverty. I turned back to the judge. I spoke clearly so that every person in the room and every reporter in the hallway could hear. I declared that I, Langston Carter, as the sole trustee of the Esther Carter Foundation, was hereby donating 100% of the recovered assets. I declared that I would not keep a single penny of the money Hunter had stolen. I told the court that the money would be divided into grants. I listed the beneficiaries. I named the state orphanage system. I named the foster care support network. I named the legal aid fund for indigent seniors. I told them that the money Hunter had stolen to buy sports cars and luxury watches would now be used to buy winter coats for children who had none. I told them that his greed would fuel their survival. I heard a sound from the defense table. It was a gasp. I looked over. Hunter was staring at the monitor on the wall, which was displaying the court record. He was realizing what I had done. I had taken his score, his loot, his prize, and I had given it away to the people he considered beneath him. I wasn't just putting him in jail, I was erasing his legacy. I was turning his crime into a charity. He slumped forward. His forehead hit the table with a dull thud. His shoulders shook. He was sobbing. He wasn't crying for the orphans, he was crying for the money. He was crying because he realized that he had destroyed his life for absolutely nothing. The judge looked at me. A small smile touched her lips. She nodded. She thanked me. She banged her gavel. She sentenced him to 20 years. I did not stay to watch them take him away. I had seen enough. I turned and walked up the aisle. The crowd parted for me. I walked out of the courtroom. I walked out of the courthouse. I walked down the steps. The reporters were shouting again. They wanted a quote. They wanted to know why I gave the money away. They wanted to know if I was crazy. I ignored them. I walked to the Mustang. I opened the door. I sat down in the white leather seat. I closed the door and the sound of the world was cut off. It was just me and the car. I took off the tie. I unbuttoned my collar. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a pair of aviator sunglasses. I put them on. I looked in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me was smiling. I turned the key. The engine roared. It was a sound of pure freedom. I put the car in gear. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the courthouse and the cameras and the tragedy behind me. I drove toward the highway. I merged into traffic. I wove through the cars. I was faster than them. I was lighter than them. I had no baggage. I reached for the radio. I turned the dial until I found a jazz station. A saxophone melody filled the cabin. It was smooth and complex. It was Esther's favorite kind of music. It sounded like a conversation in the dark. I rolled down the windows. The wind rushed in. It messed up my hair. I didn't care. I drove west. I drove toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I looked at the empty passenger seat. I could almost see her there. I could imagine her laughing with her head thrown back, holding onto her hat. I could feel her hand on my arm. I spoke to the empty seat. My voice was loud over the wind and the music. I told her that we did it. I told her that the house was clean. I told her that the boy was gone. I told her that the money was doing good work. I told her about the cruise. I told her that we were going to see the pyramids. I told her we were going to drink wine in Paris. I told her we were going to dance on the deck of the ship under the Southern Cross. I pressed down on the accelerator. The Mustang surged forward. The speedometer climbed. The world blurred past me. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was running toward something. I told her that I was coming. I told her that the adventure was just starting. I said, "Let's go, Esther." I said, "Let's go see the world." The car sped into the light. The road stretched out forever. The music played on. And as the screen fades to black, the roar of the engine is the last thing you hear, a defiant, joyous sound of a life reclaimed. The greatest mistake one can make is to mistake silence for weakness and age for obsolescence. Hunter and Zoe saw an old man past his prime, an easy target for their greed. They failed to see the lifetime of resilience and the enduring power of a partnership that transcended death. Langston's story reminds us that true dignity is not negotiable, and that justice, though sometimes quiet, is a force of nature. It teaches us that while we cannot control the betrayal of those we love, we have absolute power over how we write our next chapter. It is never too late to reclaim your life, your self-respect, and your freedom. What would you have done in Langston's place? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story of justice served, please like and subscribe for more.